Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Gazed into the Abyss. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details, and go to the story link to say hi to the author. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. Cases of hidden quirks have in the last 40 years dropped by over 60%, but this raises the question of why. By their very nature, these quirks require very specific triggers to activate, and 75% of reported cases have been traumatic incidents. Note, 25% would later go on to be villains as a result of these traumatic incidents. In most cases, it is unethical to test these quirks, and the method of checking for the vestigial bone structure in the outermost toe is superficial at best. Theory indicates that half of these cases will have a hidden quirk. But that again brings the question of ethical testing. Excerpt from the Beginner Scientist's Guide to Quirk Theory. Midoriya Izuku staggers down the road, every step almost the one that makes him collapse. His leg muscles quiver, and he is certain the muscles in his abdomen have long given up on functioning because his back hurt. Or maybe it hurt because All Might made him discover muscles he hadn't known existed. Izuku grins. The very idea that All Might is teaching him was enough that he could plow through the pains one more time. How many could say that their hero believed in them? That their hero intended them to be their successor? The answer: very few. Certainly, there were family-run agencies where the mantle of lead hero was passed on to the eldest or most powerful. And in some cases, a hero would groom a successor after years of vetting. But that wasn't the same as this. The sun sets, but for Izuku, its rays warm his soul and the side of the small hill. He looks over the water. It is red, the light of the sun reflecting beautifully. There is nothing that could ruin this day. Well, look who we fucking have. He hears a moment before he is pulled aside. His heart hammers in his chest as Bakugo Katsuki's eyes sear him with their intensity. Kaken, he whispers, and flinches when Kaken's free hand lit up with his quirk. What kind of shit is this, Deku? He roars, shoving Izuku back. I told you I would be the only one, and you haven't fucking changed your exam destination. You're a fucking quirkless piece of shit. He bites his lip. Why, you don't need a quirk to? Kaken shoves him again, the fire in his eyes roaring. Of course you need a fucking quirk to be a hero. The explosion startles him and Deku stumbles back, smelling smoke and Kaken's anger. Go be a fucking police officer and do some productive shit in your life instead of wasting my time. He can't react to Kaken grabbing him by the shirt, but he feels the residual heat of the last explosion. Get it in your fucking head, Kaken whispers, and that terrified Izuku more than anything else. Kaken was fire and flash, the loudest voice in a room and the brightest. Stay out of my way. Kaken slams his hand against Izuku's chest. It hurt, he realized as he rolled back, and kept on rolling. No, he thinks a moment before his skull meets the metal pole at the bottom. TDB. Darkness has always been a part of human existence. It was the first enemy humanity faced. Predators could be fought and natural disasters fled from. But it was the darkness that could never be defeated. There is something primal in a human's fear of the dark. It is not the fear of the monsters hidden in the dark, but a fear of all that is unseen. That fear is irrational. It is the same to fear the sharks in the ocean when you have lived your life without once seeing a coast. There are no monsters for humans to see, even in the dark. The monsters hide further in the dark. If the darkness you see is but the surface of the ocean, then the monsters lurk in the depths of the abyss. Do you understand, Midoriya Izuku? Fear not the darkness, for the only monsters are those of your mind. But the abyss is another matter entirely. TDB. Zuko wakes with a shout tearing its way past his teeth. His body trembles and his breath came in short, quick bursts. His hands feel at his face. It felt dry and flaky. His hands shook as he looked upon the flakes of dried blood. Kaken hurt me, he thinks numbly, a second before he over and expels everything in his stomach. It hurts, and the bile burns his throat. But he doesn't care. All that matters was the idea that Kaken had done that. No, it's my fault. I shouldn't have made him angry. He wouldn't hurt me no matter what. Even if he's upset, he knows what that black mark would do to his record. It was a mistake. My mistake. He smiles at his All Might poster above his desk. Then freezes. A long tear runs across it and continues along the wall. Izuku turns slowly, taking in his room. The walls are all marked with dark substances, some sections torn up as though Mount Lady's nails had gouged through them. His ceiling is clear save for a hole in the corner from which a dark substance pours out. The liquid traveling in shapes that made perfect 45-degree angles. It hurt to look at those. His desk had been wrecked and his computer missing. Who-wah-wee. He fails to articulate the thousand thoughts running through his mind. Because this was his room just after a few years of neglect and disuse. His mother would never let that happen. "Mum," he says, and then louder. "Where are you?" He stumbles out of his bed. Avoids his lunch on the floor. Steps over the weird black substance. Izuku opens his door. There are moments of impossibility in this world. Moments that once made will be echo out forever, even if no one is there to witness them. Every moment in history is but a cascading chain of coincidences that when looked back upon with the perspective of time would make sense. It was easier to believe a great man had clawed his way out of obscurity and changed the world through sheer determination than to believe the socioeconomic factors had largely formed the man, and those around him made many of those achievements possible. This was one such moment for Midoriya Izuku. He smells seawater and the cloying sweet smell of decay, the scent of that long dead and left to rot under the open sun. He feels the stifling heat and air so thick that for a single moment he wonders if he could cut through it. Izuku sees a sky on fire, waging a war against itself and clouds of inkai blackness. It is the sound that terrifies him. True silence is impossible. The beating of the heart, the rustle of clothing, and the silent whisper of breath would always make themselves present in silence, for those sounds traveled through blood and bone, not through the fickle medium of air. Silence would not be so bad. The sound is barely above a whisper, but louder than a comet crashing into the earth. Its sonic boom traveling outwards for dozens of miles before the death and destruction that would follow. It grated at his ears and tore at his soul, because it was a song he knew down to the marrow in his bones. And he knows if he ever truly heard it, and not merely this echo, he would be torn asunder. It is a song older than life, but it was a song that could end it. It is the song of finality, of the end of all things living. Instinct tells him this. Every atom of his existence confirmed this. The primitive and undeveloped lizard brain tells him to run. Izuku stumbles and retches bile on the sandy ground. No, he thinks as he clamps his hands over his ears. But the sound would not stop. I can't. I don't just stop. Let me be because anything was better than hearing the death of all things. He scrambles back. Stones in the sand tear through his clothes, but he hardly notices as he crosses the threshold of his room. He slams the door shut and sags against the comforting weight of it. Solid despite the gouges and flaking paint. It grounds him. And not only because he could no longer hear the song the Tharkanen themed off. Just take me home, he pleads, screwing his eyes shut. TDB. Izuku wakes with a gasp. Cool, fresh air fills lungs that burn and strain as though he had held his breath. He coughs and gasps. Opened his eyes. Saw blue skies. Cars sped down the street and children laugh loudly. His breath hitches and his throat constricts. The tears, when they come, run down his face freely. Hiccups rack his chest, but Izuku didn't care how he looks, not when the song was gone. Izuku calms down after a few minutes. He wiped his face and pulled his hand back. His heart froze. Dark red fluid covered his arm. Gently, he raised his fingers to his forehead. It stung, and when he pulled back, he saw mostly drying blood on them. How? He asked and looked around. There were chunks of metal and glass littered on the shattered ground. It took him a moment to recognize the shape of a street light from the wires sticking out of the cracked earth. And then he saw the small pool of blood seeping into the deep cracks of the ground. There's a very real possibility I'm going mad, Izuku mumbles. And that would be a lovely hypothesis. It would explain why All Might chose me instead of anyone else. Your personal hero solving your problems is the cheapest kind of fanservice. But it might be the safest option to go with. The other option means I heard a song that would kill if it washered, and one for all is more terrifying that All Might told me. Or, a small part of Izuku's brain whispers, this is your quirk. His thoughts grind to a halt. Kaken pushed me down, and I hit something hard. I woke up in a place that wasn't the world I know, and I heard that terrible song that must never be sung. I wake up and a street lamp has been torn to shreds. There are no witnesses or suspect other than myself. The simplest option, assuming this is real, is that I did this. And the only way any of that could have happened is from a quirk. My quirk. Which isn't possible. He had been tested after a quirk didn't manifest. Izuku has a vestigial toe joint. The logic makes sense. One for all is a gifted quirk, his traitorous mind whispers. Who says your quirk couldn't have been waiting until now? But waiting for what? For Kaken Takai. His world goes white for a moment. Izuku blinks away the white world, breathing harshly all the while. There is something there that couldn't be thought. If I did that, he thinks instead, then I have a quirk. Izuku stood and retrieves the clean shirt he had in his pack. Slowly, he wipes away the blood from his face and holds it there to the open cut. He saddles the bag and walks home slowly in a daze. He doesn't notice entering his home or taking off his shoes. Izuku hardly hears his mother's worried words or notices walking up the stairs to the bathroom. There is a face in the mirror, bloody and red-eyed from crying. Unruly green hair framed that face. It looked alien and foreign. He opens the tap and splashes water on his face. The water runs red. Izuku scrubs at his face until only clear water runs. A line of red at his right temple is the only mark he has. The wound is jagged, and unlike the straight thin wounds he'd thought of with head injuries. He hopes it didn't change the color of his hair. The door is shoved open. Izuku startles as his mother barged in, concern marking the lines of her face. "Izuku," she whispers, "you weren't answering, and there was so much blood." "Sorry," he mumbles. "I had a bit of a fall." She steps forward and pulls the hand touching the still tender wound. "Oh, Izuku, what will I do with you?" Her hand cups his chin and tilts his head, inspecting the injury. "This is going to scar badly." "I know," Deku thinks bitterly. His mother opened a cabinet and rummaged through it with practiced efficiency. She pulled out a first aid kit. "Sit down," she orders, and Izuku hops onto the counter. She unzipped the back and removed a bottle alongside some cotton swabs and thick bandages. She opens the bottle. It smells of the harsh antiseptic he hated. "Ka-san," he whines. "Can't we use the other one?" Her gaze quells anything further he had to say. "Good." It burns when she disinfected the wound, but he bears the pain quietly, letting her continue with the bandage. Change the bandage every day until it's not exposed anymore. He forces a smile. A weak one from his mother's frown. "Sorry, my head still hurts a bit. Eat first, then sleep." He obeys and ate the meal almost mechanically. Sleep came easily that night. It isn't pleasant. There are dreams of creatures tearing apart the earth, their very presence driving his mother insane. He wakes twice before resigning himself to a night without sleep. His alarm startles him awake. Surprised that he managed to fall asleep, Izuku rolls out of bed despite his tiredness. Takes a shower. Changes the bandage. Ate a meal of fruits and energy shakes. It doesn't take long for him to reach the beach. All Might isn't there yet, and so he stretches thoroughly. He takes a sip of water when he is done and waits patiently. "Young Midoriya," All Might croaks. Izuku startles, turning quickly to face his teacher, his form deflated and skinny. "Have you finished preparing?" Izuku nods and smiles. "Already done." "Good, now." All Might stopped, staring at a spot on Izuku's head. "How did you get that?" He swallowed. What was he meant to tell All Might? "I think I have a quirk, but I also think I might be going crazy. Also, I think Kaken might have Kai." His mind blanks out for a second. "I fell and hit my head on a pole," he says, not lying. "I wasn't paying too much attention." His teacher hums before nodding. "Be more careful, young Midoriya. Injuries outside training can lead to much worse injuries here." Izuku tilts his head. "That's why you're here, isn't it? I mean, most of these things look heavier than me." Perceptive as ever. By midday, Izuku is almost dead on his feet. When All Might calls for an end to training, Izuku crumbles to the ground where he's standing. The sand is warm, and he can ignore the uncomfortable feeling of sand clinging places. It was never meant to be. He hears feet approaching and opens his eyes to All Might, who throws a bottle to him. Izuku opens it and drinks deeply without so much as getting up. "I suppose you've earned a rest," All Might says, lowering himself to the ground and sitting beside Izuku. "Well, you can ask me whatever you like before I have to go." Izuku nods against the sand. He knew he would regret that when he cleaned up, but right now he was too tired to care. "Are there quirks that move people different places?" "That sounds like a form of warp quirk," All Might says. Izuku looks to the hero, who continues. "Warp quirks are probably the rarest type of quirk compared to mutation, which is much more common." "Have you heard of Master Railroad?" Izuku frowns. "I think he was a New Age hero." "And what do you know of the New Hero Age?" It doesn't bother Izuku much to answer. He likes history, and this is history being taught by his hero. That was right after the first quirks started appearing and wars broke out across the world led by people with very powerful quirks like Stormwind and Titan. The new heroes were a group of peacekeepers working with the UN that developed quirks and were placed in a specialized combat unit to face the warlords. After they managed to defeat them, they disbanded and went to act as policing units against villains in their home countries, forming the model for future heroes. A good summary, All Might replies. Master Railroad was one of the original members of the new heroes. Based on archived records, his warp quirk manifested as a train that took him and anyone with him to any place on Earth. What makes his quirk truly unique is that anyone who traveled through it said they traveled through a void. His mind stilled. A void. Nothingness. The end of all things. It resonated with him because he knew the same way a mother always knows their child, that a void was the word he was missing. It was the absence of light and love and hope. It required no context, for it destroyed all context. But his quirk wasn't like the norm, Izuku says quickly. He felt more than saw All Might shift. What exactly is the norm for a quirk, young Midoriya? One for All is neither an emission nor a transformation quirk, and whilst it can change my appearance by activating it, it is not a mutant quirk type. And I very much doubt that you will change appearance when you finally inherit One for All. Izuku frowned. Why would you think that? Predicting a quirk is nearly impossible, Izuku thinks, even if it's a matter of quirks being passed down through familial lines. Usually they express some variation, even if they are similar. Kakin quirk produces nitroglycerine, a variation of his mother glycerine quirk. And even then it could have been completely unrelated. Kasan's quirk is different from her parents. Predicting a new quirk would be impossible unless there was a precedent for it. Unless someone who had One for All before didn't express the quirk that way. A pained cough startles him, and he looked to All Might, whose hand covers his mouth. Izuku can see the red flecks on that too thin hand, with fingers almost too gaunt. You truly terrify me, young Midoriya. He chokes out, confused. Guessing from one simple statement that my predecessor used One for All differently. Izuku blinks. I said that out loud, didn't I? All Might nodded. Why can't I just shut my stupid mouth? It's always getting me in trouble, and Kakin always tells me to stop mumbling so much. Izuku. That stops him dead. All Might had never called him by his first name. Calm yourself. The world will not end because you think out loud. Better to think and question out loud than to wallow in ignorance silently. Do not apologize for your intelligence. He would have said something else, but for a shrill ringing that distracts them both. All Might looks down to his right pocket and removed his phone. He smiles at Izuku, apologetic. It seems I must return to my duties. In a second, the All Might that he had admired, but never known, not really. And he would never choose this hero over the man that spent time with him as a youth appears in place of his emaciated teacher. Have faith, young Midoriya. The appearance of All Might as a symbol of justice ushered in a new era of peace amongst the citizenry. All Might is the fabled Superman of this modern era. A man with uncompromising morals and the strength to uphold those ideals. We must be thankful that he is truly a man of honor who will not use his powers to enforce his personal ethics upon the citizenry as a benevolent overlord. Excerpt from Questioning the Modern Age of Heroes by Andile Sithole. Izuku spends the next day training at the beach. He doesn't move anything. Instead, All Might has him swim partway through the inlet and back to the beach, then up the stairs and down again. He only stops once his limbs seize out in the water, and All Might rescues him from drowning. He coughs water out of his lungs, doing his best to ignore the burning sensation in his throat and nostrils. A gaunt hand keeps him steady. Forgive me, my boy, All Might says. It seems I will have to change all swimming courses to indoor pools. Izuku agrees completely. The wind had been picking up steadily since the morning, and the still water had soon become choppy with waves. A particularly violent series of waves had sent Izuku below the surface. It was only All Might diving in that has stopped him from dying. Dying again, a part of his mind whispered. His eyes water badly, and he coughs again. Izuku collapses on the ground and breathes out harshly, and then inhaled deeply. He repeats the exercise until he has calmed down enough to talk. Good. Keeping calm is always important for a hero. Izuku looks to his hero. Ananoki Hinata disagreed, Izuku says, not snidely. She argued that following the letter of the law was the most important trait for a hero to have, and sublimating one's ego for the sake of following the people's laws. All Might tilts his head to the side. I haven't read her work in quite a while, but I do remember some of my arguments against her. Tell me, young Midoriya, do you believe in her works? I think her argument has validity. Without the law, heroes enforce their own brand of morality, don't they? And whilst I do think I would trust you if you were held accountable only to yourself, I'm not certain I'd like to live in a world where Best Jeanist had total power. He's the number 4 hero. And he deserves to be there, Izuku says strongly. But I don't think I could live up to his rigid standards of comportment. Have you seen my hair? There's no helping this. All Might chuckles, ruffling his damp hair. I suppose he can be a bit extreme in that regard. And that's how conformist states start. You must aspire to one ideal or else. It starts with the head of state decrying certain things, and soon enough your neighbors are lynching you for being different. I would hope he would never do that. But can you say you've never had days where you wanted people to have the same moral character as you? All Might says nothing to that, instead staring at Izuku. It takes him a moment to realize why. He has just criticized All Might and taken a knife to his personal ethics. Izuku swallows. I didn't mean. He trails off at All Might's hand, lifted in the universal gesture of stop. You are right, young Midoriya. Don't look so shocked. There are days where I find the system convoluted and unnecessary. Days where rules and regulations have allowed absolute monsters to walk free are the ones where I most want to tear down the system and build it again. All Might smiles, and it looks so shallow on that thin form. But I don't, because I have faith in people. My issue with Ononoki Hinata is that she completely disregards compassion and human decency, barring her twilight work. Under her view, we would be nothing but drones enforcing the word of the law, and not its spirit. So many are imprisoned because their quirk manifested, and they harmed another. But I disagree with this practice. It does nothing but breed resentment to the system, and in turn create more villains. But you're arguing that we should do what we believe is right regardless of the consequences. In a way, my words could be taken like that, All Might says. But I believe more that we should do what is right even should the consequences be dangerous to oneself. All it takes for injustice to occur is to stand aside and hope another will deal with it. But not everyone has the power to save others. And did you not try to save your friend when you had no powers yourself? Can you espouse Hinata's argument in the face of your own actions without being a hypocrite? Izuku looks away. Hold your head high, young Midoriya. It is good that you question your own actions. I wonder often if I would have left your friend to his fate if not for your intervention. What you did that day, you did out of compassion and selflessness. And whilst Kamui Woods reprimanded your actions, it was that same tenacity that made you worthy of being my successor. All Might throws him the towel on his shoulder. Continue to question, young Midoriya. Ask me as much as you would. As your teacher, it is my duty to see you mature. And that is the end of that particular line of inquiry. His hero guides him through a series of stretches before his muscles cramp, and reminds him to do them after waking, and before sleeping each day, no matter what. Izuku has no issue with that. He spends the rest of the afternoon carrying smaller items to a pile near the road for when the truck comes tomorrow. The pile he is dealing with is tall, but there's just enough mass there that it looks steady. Hopefully. He digs through and reaches for some loose pipes, grabbing at them. The first 2 come out easily, and he throws them to the side. The last, though, requires him to prop his legs against what might have generously been called a car and pull with every ounce of strength his fledgling body has. It came free with a metallic pop, and Izuku stumbles onto the sand, falling flat on his back. He sighs and raises the metal pipe high to look at it. And the fridge falling down the pile. Foo. TDB. TDB. Do the creatures you clothe yourself as understand their true nature? I have wondered this question often. They all harbor one form, yet it is impossible to generalize the creatures. The abyss is constant, steady, and chaotic. It mirrors this plane that you choose to exist within, changing forms the closer to light that it comes. Your humans are not steady, and their powers are erratic at best, following neither rhyme nor reason. Human strengths rarely pass down by genetic lineage. I wonder then, what will become of this abyss now that you have returned? Wake up, Midoriya Izuku, and come home to your people. TDB. TDB. His curse is loud and prolific when he wakes. Izuku gasps when he is done, looking around and finding himself in his room. No, not my room, he thinks, taking in the whole dripping black sludge from the ceiling and the dark smears across the walls. This again, he mumbles softly as he stood, avoiding the weird liquid traveling at odd angles. I'm very likely not hallucinating this. There was no reason for me to have that hallucination the first time, and no reason for it to repeat. He swallows and takes a deep breath. Hypothesis 1. This is a long-form nightmare. The only issue with that is there is no way of proving this is but a dream I'm experiencing. Ignore that one. Hypothesis 2. I'm insane, but I again can't prove that. Hypothesis 3. I have some form of warp quirk that only activates when I've been injured severely. Or dead. A voice in his mind whispers, but Izuku ignores it because why on earth would a quirk develop that brought you back from the dead? It makes no sense, and there was no precedent for it. Regeneration, yes, but coming back from the dead was a complete reversal of causality. But that makes him think of regression who could return plant life to a state of health, no matter how far gone it was. The study conducted on his powers by the Tokyo Institute of Technology and Harvard University had concluded it to be a form of limited reversal of causality. His power was the only reason South America still had healthy jungles, and why wood products had seen a resurgence in popularity. It is probably why Kamui Woods was so popular in Brazil. That and the 4-year stint he had spent there working with their state-sanctioned hero team in the final years of the Third War against drugs, following the repeal on recreational drugs in Canada 6 years ago. Izuku shakes his head and pulls away from those tangential thoughts. They weren't relevant at this moment. He walks to his window and pulls back the curtain. And froze. Because as far as he could tell, he is looking at clouds, thick and stormy and pregnant with rain. A long platform of darkness engulfed everything below that he could see. He rubs at his eyes and pokes his head out of the window. He can breathe normally, which considering the altitude is impossible, and why did I think it was a good idea to stick my head out? And looks down. It takes him almost a moment to realize the darkness wasn't uniform. It writhes and roils, almost like a snake pit, but not because calling it that implied normality. Realism. Sanity even. And nothing that hurts so much to look at could be normal. The ground lurches. Izuku grabs hold of the windowsill as the room tilts slowly, almost as inevitable as a lava flow. He can't hear his ragged breathing over the blood rushing through his head as his room turns. He closes his eyes and curses every bad word he ever heard Keiken say because this was madness. He loses his grip and falls to the ceiling, bracing for everything to hit him. Except nothing does. Hesitantly, he opens his eyes. Izuku's crouched on the ceiling ground now because gravity says this is down, but he is the only thing that has moved. His bed and desk are still in the same position, and even the stream of dark liquid falls upwards. Izuku has maybe a second to pay attention to this, before the sensation of being watched consumes his senses. He turns, slowly, because a part of him just knew that if he looked he would never be able to unsee what is coming. He looks. It is an eye in the same way describing lava as hot is accurate. It's true, but it couldn't describe the absolute intensity. Lava isn't simply hot. It burned hot enough to melt through rock and metal with ease. You couldn't compare a matchstick to a volcano. Nor can you compare that giant orb that deigned to pay attention to Izuku to something so mundane as an eye. It is green at the same time that it is yellow and blue, and the more he looks the more colors he sees, and some aren't natural. They aren't colors he is supposed to be able to see, and there's ultraviolet streaking by, and there is gamma radiation in starburst fractals, and there are things that went past simple electromagnetism and into realms science has no words for, and the more he looked the more he sees within the eye within the eye within the eye ad infinitum that shows him everything, and a part of his mind is breaking under the strain, and the lizard brain screams at him to run, but the rest is staring at this moment of impossibility, but the knee-jerk reaction that comes from his spine forces his arm to move and shut the curtains, and Izuku falls to the ground ceiling. No, higher thought for later, and violently expels everything in his stomach, which falls down before falling up to the spot right above his head. He rubs the steady stream of tears, stares at his blood-soaked sleeve, forces down the rising panic because bleeding from the eyes is nothing compared to that nightmare creature. In the back of his mind, he knows he is likely having a panic attack, but he doesn't care. What was a mere mortal panic attack to a thing that should not be? He stumbles to his feet and lurches drunkenly to the door. Even if he was in the highest parts of the atmosphere, the fall to the ground, and was there a ground in this place, was preferable to riding on what he assumes to be the back of a nightmare creature. Izuku shut his eyes tight and slams through the door. And falls. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. Izuku thinks a moment before landing. It didn't hurt. And felt oddly familiar. He opens his eyes to sand. Green sand. He stares at it before raking his fingers along its surface. It feels like sand. He lets the sand in his hand trickle to the ground. It behaves like sand. But the more he looks the more he sees how it reflects the light, granting it an almost red glow. He looks towards the source of light. It is a sun or whatever passed for a sun here. It is blood red, and not bright enough to cast the world in anything lighter than the early hours of twilight. He blinks, looks again, sees the smaller suns orbiting the larger one, as though they were electrons to the large sun's nucleus. Izuku stands and brushes off the odd crystal sand from his clothes. He notices the pier extending deep across the ocean, far further than any pier had a right to. It looks familiar. No, he thinks as dread mounts in his very pores, and he turns. There are piles of glowing shells, and he knows the patterns those mounds form, has spent hours tracing the most efficient route to remove the trash from the beach. He runs through the piles of shells, avoiding the long translucent tendrils reach out to him. He scans every hidden place until he makes it to the other side. All Might isn't there. It calms him because this nightmare belonged to him alone. And that thought almost brings him to his knees. No one wants to truly be alone. No one wants to be a stranger in a truly strange land where nothing makes sense, and he has to pay specific attention to forget, never ignore, for that brought attention to the song that must never be sung for life to continue. How barren did a life have to be to yearn for true isolation? And maybe that was why Izuku can stare at the beached whales. Wait, what? Izuku thinks before truly focusing on the large mounds of rotting flesh on the beach. They were whales. He knew because he could tell what a humpback whale looked like in his sleep. Except these aren't the smooth-skinned creatures he knew of. These things are bloated, their flesh torn to shreds in the places where the gases within them had forced their way out. The lack of stench from dozens of rotting whales worries him in a peripheral sort of way. There are other more pertinent things to worry over, such as the contractions racking the whale closest to him. Its mass stretches and squeezes, and oh lord, that is a head poking out of the larger whale in a sick parody of birth. The calf is drenched in blood and the fluids of a rotting womb as it pushes out of its progenitor, because calling it a mother implies there is something natural about this to flop helplessly on the ground beside it. It makes a crooning sound. No, the progenitor makes that sound. The same progenitor that turns a massive head to stare at Izuku. There is nothing in that gaze he can read. It might have been malice or empathy, or maybe a feeling Izuku has no words for. It may be a creature saying I am and you are, but that is all conjecture running through the higher thought processes of a human brain, whilst the more basic instincts have already sent Izuku running in blind panic anywhere away from those monstrosities. He speeds up the stairs and past the cracked and ruined road. A glance upward reveals a forest he knows isn't supposed to be there. He doesn't particularly care. Dead creatures are not meant to give birth. So, he runs. Izuku curses, skids to a halt, because somewhere between running from the beach and entering the forest he has lost a portion of his life. He checks his watch. About an hour since All Might left, and it has hardly taken more than 10 minutes to run from the beach. It is dark, not pitch black, but there are gradations in the shadows that stand out starkly to his senses. And he doesn't want to know why. He can instantly tell there are 32 shades of shadow in it, or why some of the shadows are moving. Izuku's thought processes slams to a halt. He is in a forest of trees, not any larger than ones he had seen before. There are dark shapes, not shadows, for they cast none, and he shoved that thought down with the rest of the worrying ones flitting in the tree branches. But why does it feel like something large is moving? He focuses on the odd spot, seeing only a tree and its roots dragging against the ground. Oh, he thought, that tree's sinking. Actually, now that I have a moment to look and not scream my head off, quite a few of the trees are moving. Is this what they call shock? Or am I too numb to feel any shock? Wait, no, that's panic. And whilst I still have a moment of calm, I should face that pocket of shadow that feels familiar. His legs spring into motion. Izuku ducks beneath swiping claws and low branches, jumps over roots that might have tripped him. There, that patch of shadow in an alcove is different, safe, and Izuku slides right through it and fell. He lands on a bed. Izuku takes in his room, not daring to look at the window. Take me home, he pleads as he walked to the door. Take me home. Please, just take me back home. Izuku opens the door. TDB. TDB. His throat is dry. The sun sears his eyelids. Sand clings to his limbs uncomfortably. Izuku opens his eyes slowly and sees a blue sky. Looking further, he sees the sun setting, casting the world in vibrant and warm, but more importantly, natural reds and oranges. Yellow sand coats one arm. He sighs and stands, wiping down the gritty material off his body. The only thing wrong with the sun is that it hadn't set enough. A quick glance at his watch confirmed that guess. He pauses at the sight of a blood smear on the sand, vaguely the size of a human body and still damp. Izuku gulps, noticing the dryness in his throat all the more acutely. Around that smear of blood are bits and pieces of rusted metal all torn to shreds and littered carelessly on the beach. Sticking out the sand and standing erect is a stainless steel handle. A fridge handle. Izuku feels his gorge rise because he knows, just fucking knows exactly where that handle came from. He knows exactly what those pieces of rusted and flaking metal would have been were they still whole. There are things Izuku never wants to admit out loud. He never wants to admit his fear that All Might is stringing him along in some perverse joke, or maybe that he would never be worthy of All Might's power. But this is one thing he had to admit. I died, Izuku whispers. And I came back. A fridge crushed me. And yesterday, cack. No. There are still things he couldn't admit. Yesterday I cracked my skull on a pole. The sound that escapes his lips can hardly be called human. In some ways, it is more horrifying than the creatures that he has seen because this was him. This was a sound simply from understanding a truth so perverse and fundamental that it encompasses his entire being. The keening wail of one morning at death was similar to the sound Izuku made. Except, it could never match the despair that laced Izuku's heart and soul. Because who can stand over the place they died and mourn? It could have been hours or seconds before Izuku falls silent. In this barren place, where the only company were silent pillars of discarded memories, uncaring of the grief of a mortal child. And how accurate could that description be for one who had walked outside the mortal coil unscathed? Time is an object with no meaning, a transitory illusion made manifest only by the acknowledgement of an observer. Without one to watch the sand trickle through the hourglass, one moment would always stretch out into infinity, with neither regard nor interest for those trapped within its embrace. Izuku shuts off the part of his mind that thinks too much, locking it tight with the long overdue panic attack and 1,000 feelings of horror and revulsion. Calmly, he walks to his bag and retrieves a bottle of water and returns to the place he died. No. That required thought, and thought would only crush him. It was easy to pour it over that red patch. He watches the sand greedily suck the moisture. And some of the red. 3 trips to the sea and back are all it takes till the red has vanished beneath the mud. He smiles. Then pauses. No, hiding this sort of evidence was not something worth smiling about. Izuku shoulders his bag and makes the long trip home, carefully keeping his mind blank of the events of the last 2 days. He greets his mother, ate with her, takes a shower. When he is certain his mother is asleep, Izuku switches on the light, boots up his PC for the illumination it would provide and flicks on a lamp. He collapses onto his bed and places a pillow over his mouth. Slowly, he unlocks the vault, keeping all of his pent-up emotions. But the moment one escaped, the rest followed suit with no regard for his feelings. It is a long time before his screams pass into sobs. A longer time still before exhaustion took him. For every lost battle, there is only one reason behind it: a lack of sufficient knowledge. Know your enemy. Know his strengths, be it tactical awareness or a powerful quirk. Know his weaknesses, be it a fear of spiders or a lack of skill. The enemy you know is an enemy whose powers are easier to counter. Overwhelming strength overpowers skill in every engagement, but overwhelming knowledge and appropriate use of that knowledge defeat even raw skill and strength. Excerpt from the Recovered Tenets of Combat, likely authored by an underground hero or vigilante. Izuku dreads every second of the next morning from the moment he awakes from his slumber, disturbed by nightmarish visions of creatures that defy mortal laws of biology. As he showers, he sees eyes that gazed past infinity, found the outer edges of existence pitiful, and returned to indifference. They follow him as he scrubs raw his skin long past the memory of gamma radiation streaking by in never-ending fractal patterns, their lines forming geodesic routes to the primordial origin of entropy, where the arrow of time first formed and forced an incalculable point of mass energy to expand outwardly in an inevitable death march of the final heat death of all that existed. He changes and eats with the memory of corpses still moving, their bloated masses perverting the cycle of life and birth to bring forth a dead creature from a long-dead organism. Izuku doesn't want to think of how that calf could have survived not live, never lived through such a creation. There would have been no nutrients to feed on, unless it had fed on the rotting form of its progenitor as a carrion eater. But then, what sort of creature would come back from death to sing to its child likely long dead as well? No, that makes it too sympathetic. It is a horror that should never under any circumstances be exposed to the world he lives in. How different am I? Izuku wonders. I died and returned. Does the fact that my body isn't rotting enough to make me any less a monster? The thought stills him in the process of tying the last knot in his laces. Only monsters came back from the dead. He stands slowly and forced back the tears, because anything would be better than this power. I can't be a zombie, Izuku thinks. Because I still have a heartbeat. Definitely not a vampire or anything like that. He removed his phone and typed a quick query. The first result is enough. Revenant. A ghost or corpse brought from the dead to haunt the living. How far removed is Izuku from that? Types of ghosts can be corporeal. And maybe his corpse came back perfectly, but it didn't change that it had been a corpse twice in a single weekend. Once when the fridge had crushed him. The other when his head had cracked open. Kaken, he thinks suddenly, and wonders why. Not important right now. Izuku sighs, trying to shake the thoughts away. It doesn't matter. So long as he didn't die again, it could all be a hallucination brought on by overwork. There was no proof of it other than his memories of impossible creatures, and the song that will devour mortal souls in worship. And those could be passed off as part of it. You know it's real, a part of Izuku whispers. He ignores that voice. His muscles are still strained. With time, he will be able to continue his exercises in the morning. But until then, All Might had encouraged he not wake up early to train. Izuku takes the train to school. The repetitive clack-clack of the train tracks, and the absolute mundanity of salarymen glued to their phones, delinquents with neon hair and more piercings than skin, and the occasional laughs from the two ladies across from him help lull him into a light sleep. It is simple, then, to let his mind numb even after he has disembarked from the train and joined his classmates. He doesn't glance in Kaken's direction, afraid that it would be the spark that sets off the wildfire. Even years after they fell out, he can tell what mood Kaken is in based on the type of anger in his voice, as he shouts one of his lackeys into submission. The quick and intense explosion was usually amusement or mild irritation. That long drawn-out inferno being genuine anger when someone spilt a glass of water on Kaken's shoes. There, those bright embers are calm, or what passes for calm thoughts or distraction, by a relatively simple task the teacher had set. Analyzing the impact on poverty from the heroics industry. The streak of passion like a comet in the night sky is a genuine shock. But the agitated sea of viscous magma has Izuku rushing to pack his items in his bag. Because the last time he saw that rage-hate-envy mix, he discovered his quirk. He ducks his head low and leaves with the flow of students, joining the sea of bodies in the hallway outside. He sticks closer to the groups of girls. Less chance of Kaken starting something with that group. Kaken's anger is almost physical in its intensity. Izuku flinches every time he feels those molten pits land on his back. Only once he has left the school and is back on the train did he let his heart rate drop from pounding to merely erratic. At home, Izuku changes into his running gear and decides that, yes, he needed a new pair of running shoes. He eats an apple and mixes a protein shake before heading out. All Might waits for him on the road overlooking the beach. Izuku focuses on his thin teacher, not letting his eyes roam to where he knows there should have been beached whales. He rakes his eyes over the scooter All Might leans against. "Good afternoon, my boy," All Might greets and stands. He cracks his back in one fluid pop that left Izuku wincing. How was school? It floors Izuku, as it always does, that All Might genuinely cares. Even his mother asked more out of perfunctory greeting than genuine interest more often than not. She cared when he came home bruised and bleeding, yes. But unless his life was in danger, she wasn't too interested in how he spent his afternoons. So Izuku opens up to the only adult who cares. It was a bit boring for most of the day. A technical truth because Kaken is always angry, and only sometimes furious. But our history teacher had us discussing the impact of heroics on the cycle of poverty. Oh, All Might says, leaning forward slightly. And did your teacher use Saruhiko Ando or Dylan Salvator as resource material? Izuku knows on a purely rational level that All Might is smart. He had figured out the weakness of the sludge villain in seconds, whilst Izuku had faltered. And yet he still found it difficult to reconcile the symbol of justice with this quiet, brilliant, and frail man. Both, actually, though I'm not certain if I like Salvator's stance. He just seems so dejected with the world. He expects perfection from heroes and argues their very presence invites challenges to their strength in the form of villains. Salvator did commit suicide a few years later, All Might says as he mounted his scooter. Now, time to get to work. Izuku runs at the pace All Might sets, letting the repetition of step, breath, step distract him. It isn't a hard run by any stretch, not when All Might set the pace at one Izuku could follow easily. Eventually, though, the burning in his legs catches up to him. How do, Izuku says between breaths, other heroes fight? It is a stupid question, Izuku knew. But he still needs to breathe. What do you mean? All Might asks, not slowing down. You and Endeavor have. He pauses to take a deep breath and sprint up the incline, combat quirks. But what about heroes without them? All Might doesn't respond until they are at the bottom of the small hill and pulls over to the side. He motions to the grass. Izuku sighs but lowers himself and performs press-ups. All Might, he has learnt, might entertain his questions, but not to the detriment of his training. What you're doing now? Izuku cranes his neck up to see All Might. Training. Yua will teach you the fundamentals, but the agency you join will help you specialize further. Still, Izuku says, going down. Being able to summon snakes that extend 20 meters is great, but guns are effective further. True, my boy. But no trained hero would let a gunman get a line of sight on them. We all go through simulations to deal with those scenarios. And even then, we train our abilities to discover applications we were unaware of. And you went through the same. All Might chuckles deeply. I was not born skilled, Izuku. I studied for years as a boxer, even after receiving one for all. Wouldn't it make sense for me to learn how to fight as well? If I know how to throw a punch now, won't it be better than trying to learn alongside figuring out one for all? You, All Might trails off. You make a valid point. Come, let us finish this run before you go home. Izuku stands, rolls his shoulders, shakes out his legs and runs. TTB. TTB. He wakes up in the dark, blinking in confusion. Looking to the side, he sees that the alarm has yet to ring. Only by a few minutes, yes, but still odd. He shrugs. That just meant a few more minutes in the shower. Making sure not to wake his mother, he walks to the bathroom and checks his wound. It is healing nicely, though it will scar. He cleans it, wincing with every prod before taking a shower. School is school, no more interesting than average, but somehow more stressful. Kacchan doesn't glance at Izuku, but that disinterest is almost worse than his anger. Almost. It leaves him tense, nervous the same way a mouse would be under a hawk's gaze. Because Kacchan isn't ever quiet. So maybe Izuku does run out the moment the last bell rang, but no one is watching to call him out on it. He's at the beach early as usual, and it is not empty. It takes him a moment to notice the man crouched on a precarious stack of appliances and dozing from what he can tell. The man's dark hair is one step away from impossible, and that black jacket open at the front is completely impractical. But Izuku would be lying if he thought the tiger skin wrap around his waist is anything less than cool. Izuku isn't sure what to say to the man. He's dozing if the loud snores are any indication, and Izuku doesn't want to startle him and be responsible for the man falling. So, he just stands there, awkwardly, nervously, until All Might comes looking like a hero and not a gaunt, sickly man. Midoriya, my boy, the man greeted, and then looked up to the strange man. I see you've met Jin Mo-rai. The man yawns and stands, revealing his bare midriff, and Izuku wonders if abs like that were possible for humans. He's just been staring at me for the last few minutes, Jin Mo-rai says. Good instinct, trying not to startle me. Jin Mo-rai flips and lands gracefully. He's not particularly tall, if anything you might consider him short. But his eyes are what truly set him apart, because Izuku has never seen anyone with eyes that practically glow red or have a bright cross where the pupil should be. He doesn't bother wondering how the man deals with changes in light intensity, because those eyes clearly work on the power of bullshit. Hi, Izuku says warily, looking to All Might for guidance. The man simply nods. My name's Izuku. The man considers Izuku for a moment and nods. I will teach you to fight, for Yagi cannot, he says simply. Izuku frowns. Who's Yagi? He asks. All Might splutters, but the man simply stares at him in what might be shock or annoyance. Ask your teacher later. For now, I want you to punch me. Don't look shocked and just do it. Izuku glances to All Might once more. Sees his hero nod. Throws a punch. His fist stops in the palm of Jin's hand, not budging an inch. His wrist hurts from the sudden stop. Other hand this time. He does so. Again. Punch. Again. Punch. Again. Punch. Again. Punch. Again. Punch. The man falls silent and steps back, looking to All Might. How long have you been training him? 2 weeks now. And you've failed to teach him how to throw a straight punch, he accuses harshly. All Might winces. Your teaching skills haven't improved. Izuku has never seen his hero wilt like that. Not against villains or vicious journalists, and he's not certain which group is crueler. Jin turns back to face Izuku. You will kick now. He does so nearly a dozen times before Jin is satisfied. Izuku breathes deeply, trying not to look weak before this man who All Might so obviously respects. Your form is atrocious in different ways. Good. It means you've never taught yourself bad habits. I will not teach you to box as I taught All Might. Instead, I shall teach you renewal taekwondo. He crouches, and like this Izuku is looking down on him as he smiles. I designed it specifically for people with strengthening quirks, or those whose quirks increase over time, like All for One. Izuku stills at how casually the man says Izuku's greatest secret. He looks to All Might, who says, later. Jinmo Rai snorts. I see he's told you nothing about me. No matter. I was once called Yichindi-song, but I very much doubt that name will mean anything to you. 2 days a week, I teach you form and technique, and All Might shall make you strong. Now, prepare yourself. The training is harsh, harsher than anything Almighty had put him through. Jinmo Rai is not a complicated man and hardly expects perfection on Izuku's first try or even his 100th. He simply asks that Izuku try, and he isn't about to fail at that. He never truly knew how to throw a punch before, so Jinmo Rai shows him a straight punch and forces him to practice until the muscles in his arms cramp. And then he shows him 2 basic stances and forces him to flow between each until his legs quiver, and he simply wants to pass out and die. He survives and lies on the ground, breathing harshly long after Jinmo Rai has said his goodbyes and left All Might a warning to put more effort into teaching and less in heroics. All Might hands him a bottle of water, and Izuku takes it gratefully. He very almost gives up halfway to his lips. Yagi, All Might says, that's me. Izuku quirks a brow. My name. Toshinori Yagi. I forget sometimes that All Might isn't my name. I'm sorry for not telling you. Izuku shrugs. It's fine. I mean, I never asked, so you can't really be held responsible for that. Giving one's name is only polite. And you gave me your secret. I think that counts for more. Izuku sits up. Who was that? Jinmo Rai, All Might says, as if that's all the answer needed. He taught me and many other heroes throughout the decades. Izuku blinks. He barely looks older than 20, and that's a stretch, he says quickly. What quirk keeps you alive that long? Not many, All Might says somberly, looking away for a moment. Yichindi-song was one of the first heroes, young Midoriya, though he's taken great pains to be forgotten in the modern age. He, along with the 6, freed Korea in what is known as the War Against Heaven. I've never heard of that battle, he says, or the 6. All Might huffs. They might as well be folktales now. Ultimately, none of this matters. Jinmo Rai will teach you, and that is all you need to know. Izuku doesn't like that answer. But he also doesn't press the issue any further. He heads home and finds his mother almost done with dinner. Izuku greets her, smiling, and is up the stairs before she can reply. He sees tired eyes in the mirror as he cleans the wound. The shower helps to relieve some of the stress of the day and soothes the tiniest bit of pain. Dinner is a quiet affair with Izuku too tired to initiate conversation. He knows his mother wants to say something, maybe a reminder to throw out the trash tomorrow. The plate is a few bites to being empty before she says anything. You always come home tired, his mother says simply. He considers how much of the truth to tell his mother. I'm just training to get into UA, he says, because that isn't a lie. Perhaps not the whole truth, but more than enough. She smiles sadly. Izuku, you know I'm proud of you no matter what you do. Except you don't think I can get into UA. Izuku stands and takes his plate. Thanks for dinner, Kai-san. I didn't mean it like that, his mother says as he's placing the plate in the sink. I just want to see you happy. Izuku's smile is just as sad. Then have a bit of faith in me. It might be cruel to leave it at that, but Izuku is in his bedroom long before his mother replies. He leaves a single lamp on and crawls into bed, covering his face with a pillow. He refuses to cry, absolutely refuses to act like a child. So no, those aren't tears staining his pillow. He loses track of how long he's like that, but eventually, his chest stops hurting and his eyes stop burning. It becomes easier to simply lose track of time and let his mind still. It is peaceful just to let his mind explore outward, expanding further and further. He passively follows the arcs of shadows and their gradients. Izuku feels like he is sinking, and that forces him awake. He sees something dark writhing on his bed and rolls off quickly, putting as much distance from what looks like tar boiling on his bed. Instinct makes him dash to the light switch and flick it on. Brightness floods the room, batting away the shadows. They dissipate like mist, and to Izuku it feels like they're dying and screaming all the while. His heart beats like a jackhammer until those shadows are gone, and only the regular ones remain. Izuku does not sleep well. To trust in one person to have our best interests is a fool's gambit. To trust in individuals whose power can reshape landscapes or destroy the laws of physics is a losing battle. The law has been written by every organized society, and whilst some laws are reprehensible, the people have changed them for the better. We must hold heroes to the highest standards. We must hold them to the letter of the law when they act out their duties as heroes. Excerpt from The Laws of Heroes by Hinata Oninoki. He struggles to recreate the feeling of drowning and falling in shadows. That sensation of sinking to another place where monsters reside eludes Izuku. He's terrified about what might be waiting for him on the other side. But this belongs to him. This is his quirk, no matter the possible pain that awaits. One for all will come in a few months once his body is strong enough to handle it. But right here and now this belongs to him. But no matter how hard it is to reach that other place, one thing comes easily. Izuku can feel the shadows. It gets harder to focus in class. He can tell when, and sometimes how, people are moving by the way their shadows interact. There is his teacher awkwardly stretching his hand beneath his desk, and there is a classmate pulling out their phone for it drives away the shadows in the area. Behind a girl flips her hair, fine and thin shadows shifting quickly. And further back someone is putting the finishes touches to a paper crane. Here his own shadow becoming larger and smaller as it falls in and out of the shade of his desk. Those are the only vividly clear ones. Most are blurry blobs, only important as they become sharply larger or smaller. And past a certain point, they become too small to feel. At noon he walks outside and feels nearly blind. The sun is directly overhead, and every shadow is tiny and basically circular. It's evening, and he is walking home that he learns there is a radius to what he can feel. 1 second, he might as well be on a deserted street, and the next he feels Kachan's shadow, and it should be the same as any other. But to Izuku it might as well be staring at the sun moments before he turns on to the same street as Izuku. He tenses because it's Kachan, and his explosions are a reason to be afraid on any given day. Especially now when he's angry in a way Izuku has never seen before. This isn't the bright ember of disgruntled calm, nor is it the blowtorch of very rare grief. It freezes him to the spot as Kachan stalks towards him. He's had another growth spurt. Deku thinks dumbly as Kaken stares at him, glancing only once to the budding scar at his temple. "Stay out of my fucking way," Kachan snarls, eventually, without the usual heat or venom. His hands are balled up into fists, but there isn't the slightest hint of an explosion. "Got it?" Deku nods slowly and watches Kachan stalk past him without another word. Izuku doesn't look back, but he does sense the almost hesitant way his shadow shifts. Hesitance is not something you associate with Kachan. Was that an apology? Izuku shakes his head, because that's ridiculous. Kachan's never wrong. Besides, he has nothing to apologize for. Maybe because he can. Izuku walks away, and decides to forget that entire encounter even happened. He's become good at it. Simple human interactions are infinitely easier to forget than nightmare creatures. But feeling shadows isn't enough. There's more, and it drives him to an almost feverish obsession with learning about it. He searches for quirks on shadows and darkness, learns about villains like Gru and Underside, but their quirks are nothing like his. At least, not simply from the description given. He reads what he can about Master Railroad, little as there is on his quirk. The man had been intensely private about his life, and it shows from the absolute dearth of first account descriptions. Even his teammates barely spoke of his quirk. There's a single account from a civilian, the man rescued. "We traveled through the darkest abyss aboard a train to infinity," and Izuku isn't certain how much of that is accurate, and how much is poetic license. The research does give him the chance to skim over Hawkmoon's first autobiography. He doesn't have the time to read it fully, but he does appreciate the unrestrained optimism in her writing. There is something beautiful about words so bright they banish the dark. Information is sparse, and it makes him search for progressively more obscure texts. His mother eyes him worriedly when he carries a rather controversial book published in the Second Dark Age on the physiology of some of the first expressed quirks. It was controversial mostly because the vivisections were conducted on kidnapped individuals. But Izuku has long reached a point where he must know, and he could have downloaded the online copy, and not deal with his mother's disappointed gazes. But the library copy has the author's handwritten commentary in the margins. All he learns is that humans are fucked up and can justify anything in the name of their beliefs. A few weeks of futile research is enough for Izuku to admit defeat. He's filled up 2 new notebooks with information and observations of his own quirk, though he does hide them as best he can. He doesn't want to imagine what will happen if his mother or a villain finds it. Or, even worse, if Kachan does. He's sitting in the lounge watching a documentary on mutant quirks, one evening when the thought strikes him. It's the narrator's words on how people can develop secondary mutations under specific triggers that clues him in on what he's been missing. I died each time I went there. Logically, I need to die again to get there. He waits for the voice that's always arguing with him to say something. It stays quiet this time, making Izuku quirk a brow in shock. Then he realizes he's expecting a voice in his head to argue with him, and accepts that it doesn't matter in the face of the things he's seen. I don't want to die. Izuku considers the thought, finds it to be honest, accepts what must be, and stops his research. Falling into a routine after that is easy for Izuku. He simply has no time to think of anything else. His social life, already non-existent, dies completely, and Izuku misses every event he had considered attending, from the 5th reboot of Godzilla this decade, or the book signing by Best Jeanist the next city over. It also doesn't help that he can't see his mother without regretting every word he said. He loves that she doesn't push him to say anything by confronting him. He suspects, though, that neither one of them really knows how to deal with the rift between them. Another week of awkward silences is more than Izuku is willing to handle. "Kasan," he says one evening. She looks up, startled. "I'm sorry." His mother smiles at him and ruffles his hair. Once, Izuku might have had the energy to protest. "I know. And I'm sorry you thought I didn't believe in you. You just don't want me to get hurt if I fail." He leans into her touch like a child. "I promise I." "What is it?" she asks warily. Izuku swallows, because he doesn't want to lie to his mother for the rest of his life. Not when she's been nothing but kind his entire life. "What if I had a quirk?" he asks uncertainly. His mother steps back so she can meet his eyes. "You saw the scan. Vestigial toe joint," Izuku thinks without the usual bitterness. "And it's wrong in half the cases for hidden quirks," he whispers. "They need triggers to activate and can go unnoticed until late in life." Her gaze is kind and without pity. She's thinking it over, Izuku sees, and mulling over the matter. Izuku, at the risk of playing into a fantasy, and doesn't that just cut deep? What trigger event? He swallows again. This. He points to the scar at his right temple. "I think it might have been a head injury." "That's not what happened," the voice says, and Izuku locks that voice to the deepest recesses of his mind. He had wondered where it had run off to. She stays silent for a long time. "Maybe she doesn't believe me." His mother sits, finally. "Your father's quirk manifested when he was 20. Izuku perks up. "We were taking a walk and some thug, oh gosh. He was barely older than you and his hands were shaking so badly. Well, he pulls out a knife and your dad tried giving him our money. But I don't know what happened and your dad was bleeding next thing I knew. It was terrifying seeing him in pain. And then he screamed. Except all that came out was fire." She looks both nostalgic and sad, ever so sad. "So yes, I think I can trust you're not lying to yourself." Izuku hesitates, uncertain of how to respond to her words. They're little he's learnt of his father other than that man worked abroad since he was 5 and went missing a few years later. Izuku can't even remember what the man looks like. And the few pictures his mother shows him might as well be those of a stranger. Sometimes he can see bits and pieces of the familial relation, the freckles he inherited from his father, as well as the shape of his face and the dark undertones of his hair. "I can feel shadows. And I come back from the dead. It's weird. There's more, I know there is. When I hit my head, I went somewhere strange." She's worried now. "Where?" "It was somewhere dark, and I was terrified." Kasan. He looks down and sees his hands are shaking, and his eyes burn with unshed tears. "There were things there with me." Warm arms circle around his shoulders and grip him tightly. "Izuku, honey, I'm here." That reassurance grounds him. "We can go to a quirk counselor and help you, El." "No," he tries to say harshly, but his voice breaks, and he squeaks it out instead. "I can't. I just can't. They'll take me away and lock me up, and I don't want to be some EE experiment. No one's going to do that." She pulls away, meets his eyes, asks, "What aren't you telling me?" Tears stream down his face, and he trembles. "I died, Kasan. A fridge fell on me and I died." He looks away. "I saw the blood and I went to that place, and there are monsters hiding there, and I'm so fucking scared that I'm one, and they'll lock me up and dissect me if they ever find out, and..." He doesn't feel the hands on his shoulders. Doesn't feel her shake him. But he does hear her. "Izuku, look at me." He does. Her face is carefully blank. "Okay, no counselors. No doctors. But you need to explain." Izuku takes a deep breath and tells her about the beach and the fridge falling on him. He keeps out all mention of All Might. He explains the distorted version of his room and stutters when he reaches the eye because humans weren't meant to see those spectrums, and his brain hurts remembering it. The whales give him pause for how do you describe the something which is dead but may never die. Her calm facade cracks every so often. When he finishes, his mother pulls him into a comforting embrace. And your head? Izuku stills. I just fell and hit the pole. Nothing else happened. Except for Koch, he cuts that thought off. Locks it in the same place, where he forgets that song that must never be sung. Izuku, I need you to be honest with me. He shakes his head. Please, just please trust me, and don't force me to say anything, Izuku pleads. I don't want to think about it. I can't. His head hurts. Ignoring something and not remembering it are two different things. And you can't really ignore certain memories, as the very act makes them more vivid. So, the more he tries to ignore the first time he went to that place, the clearer the siren call of the song that will not permit life to continue becomes. Just this echo of a memory splits his head with pain. Izuku, his mother says loudly. It brings him back. He feels something wet on his lips and raises a hand there. His fingers come away red. His mother stands and grabs a paper towel from the counter. Izuku accepts it gratefully and presses it to his nose, letting it soak up the blood before he makes a mess everywhere. Thank you. He winces because the headache is getting worse. But the pain makes it easier to forget not ignore the song. Can I have a cup of tea? His mother makes an entire pot. Izuku has to get another paper towel because the first one is soaked. They drink in silence. I'm scared, he admits, not meeting her eyes. What if I'm one of those monsters? You're not, his mother says fiercely. You can't prove that. It's like going crazy. I can't tell you definitively that I'm conscious and not trapped in some nightmare. Izuku, look at me. I think I would know my own son. And if you were a monster, why would you tell me the truth? The question shakes him to the core. So simple, and yet he has no response. Kasan. Go to sleep, Izuku. We'll figure it out. TDB. TDB. I don't want to die, Izuku thinks once more. But I need to know. He sits on the edge of the tub, watching it fill with warm water. It gives him time to consider his life up until this moment, and whilst he doesn't find it lacking, he does find it wanting. There hasn't been a single blazing moment other than saving Kachin. And the only person who considers it so is Izuku. An All Might, you fool. He hums. Accepts that yes, his hero's acknowledgement is all he really needs. He smiles, terrified that this might be a mistake. When the tub is nearly full, he picks up a needle. It's a one-time use sort of needle. You press it to the flesh, and the pneumatic piston does most of the work in depositing the contents in a person. Izuku presses it to his forearm, hissing when the needle pierces his flesh. The pain disappears in moments. Local anesthetic has many uses. This might not be one of the recommended uses. Izuku slides into the tub and waits a few minutes for his body to match the temperature of the water. He takes a deep breath to quell the rising panic. It doesn't work. His hand trembles as he grabs the handle near him. There's nothing special about it, just a simple material meant to mimic the look and feel of wood without any of the problems. It is, though, attached to a very sharp knife. His mother is meticulous about many things, and the sharpness of her kitchen knives is one of them. He's not sure what a blade that's short is meant for other than maybe being a steak knife. Except he knows where those are, and they're nowhere near this sharp. He takes another deep breath. And then another. It takes him a moment to realize he's hyperventilating. And those are tears as well. His hand shakes as he raises the blade. This is a stupid fucking idea, and nothing is worth knowing. His hand stills naturally. Oh fuck, I really want to know. He brings the blade down and watches it plunge deep into his forearm. He feels nothing but horror. He pulls and flesh parts easily. Blood, vivid and red, almost seems to flood out. It stains the water, and Izuku watches the water change colors. It's odd, watching the fluid keeping him alive leave like a leaky tap. Drip, spurt, drip. There's so much. At least I'll know, he thinks and wishes he has the power to smile. It takes a few seconds for his breathing to slow. Wheezing and long gasps as his weak lungs fail to oxygenate his body. A few more seconds for him to lose the strength to keep his head raised. With his last breaths, he inhales bloody water, too weak to even choke on it. No matter what, he thinks with the fading embers of consciousness, this will all be over. Izuku closes his eyes and dies. TDB. TDB. Is this your choice, Izuku Midoriya? Is this the choice you make knowing full well the consequences? You can still refuse this future and pass on to the dark. You will die mourned by few. But this death will be final. I offer you this choice, for you must know this can be an option. This time and no other. Anything is possible to you if only once. Is that your choice, then? So be it. I accept this contract. You shall live by the grace of the abyss, and by your sacrifice the abyss will live. Death is inevitable. Entropy is the inevitable end of all things. Even gods and nightmares will die one day, long after the stars perhaps, but die they will. But you are beyond even them. Rise, Izuku Midoriya, and see your kingdom. TDB. TDB. Izuku breathes. It takes him a moment to understand this irrefutable fact. There is oxygen in his lungs, oxygen that permeates the blood flowing through his body. Blood he watched leave. Izuku breathes. He opens his eyes, not focusing on anything in particular. He inspects his remaining senses. Touch tells him he's dry and on something soft. Smell gives nothing but dust, blood, and maybe a hint of decay. Taste is blood in his mouth. Sound is the pounding of blood in his ears. Shadow tells him that the world will wait on him till he is ready. Izuku breathes. He coughs, but that turns into a chuckle that morphs into laughter tinged with hysteria. I'm here, he says between breaths. I'm fucking here. He wipes away the tears and sits up, looking around. He knows this room, and will always know it. That poster of All Might will always be known to him, even if it has a rip through it. The broken PC and the marks on the wall are no more foreign to him than his room bathed in light and normality. It scares him that this is normal now, even if it is strange. He stands, avoiding the dark fluid that makes perfect geometric shapes in the corner of his vision. Izuku looks to his arm. There's a scar there, pale and silvery and jagged, which is infinitely better than an open wound. He traces it, feeling no pain. If anything, it's still numb. Fact. Wounds that cause death heal near instantly. He pauses and tilts his head. Assuming no time has passed. The window is blacked out. It takes him a moment to notice it isn't painted, or even the dark fluid making fourth-dimensional shapes in the corner of his vision. The darkness is not uniform. It shifts and twists this way and that, but Izuku feels nothing concerning from it, an alien sort of contentment made up of amusement, and something like inevitable/finally/acceptance. Izuku reaches out. His hand rests on the window latch as he considers the wisdom in this. You just committed suicide. The voice he spends a lot of time ignoring says. I had pretty reasonable odds of coming back. He retorts and shoves the voice down. There are more important things to worry about. He flips the latch and slides the window open. The sudden rush of darkness doesn't come. The suffocating weight he expected is missing. The darkness simply stays there, as if the windowsill is an impenetrable barrier. Cautiously, he places his hand on the shadow. It sinks in slightly. He watches the shadows dance between his fingers and the back of his hand, joyous as a puppy with a new ball. The joy is alien and mixed with predator/master/enemy/protect and safe/home/alive. Izuku jerks his hand back at that last sensation. The shadows don't pull back, don't impede him in the slightest. They simply go back to what they were doing, dancing and forming shapes. The more Izuku doesn't stare directly at it, the more he can feel the complex shape the shadows make. There's something both wondrous and horrifying lurking in those patterns, and if he could see more, feel more, he knows it would break him with its complexity. He turns away, focuses his senses on the door instead. That feels safer in so much as he can feel nothing past it. He knows the range of his senses is about 20 meters, and his room is nowhere near that large. And yet, his world is confined to the walls of his room, and the patterns the shadows outside his window are making. Patterns he's forgetting easier with each passing moment. A deep breath centers him slightly. Izuku opens the door. He expects sand and a dozen suns and rotting whales. He gets none of that. Instead, he gets concrete, if concrete was a dark shade of blue. There are cracks where darkness leaks out, as though the world is rejecting something so mundane as concrete. Izuku kneels and runs a finger across the blue surface, finding the ground warm and surprisingly textured. The blue flakes off easily. He looks to his finger where the blue flakes decaying rapidly. He frowns and lays his palm on the surface. It takes him a moment to feel the flow of shadows below the ground. There's an order to the way it flows, almost like veins, and yet Izuku gets the impression that the darkness could flow any direction and still be fine. Izuku looks up. There are buildings, dozens of them. It is unfamiliar for but a moment. And then he makes out the patterns hiding there. Those crystal columns are the pillars of a downtown coffee shop he likes. And the snarling fractal pattern creatures are the cartoonish puppies on the pet store, a few blocks from his home. There, in the distance, is a column of absolute black, floating in the air and sucking up every drop of light from the purple sun streaking across the sky like a bullet. And Izuku knows it to be the tallest building in his city. He looks at the street again and realizes with dawning horror that this is the street next to the apartment he shares with his mother. The ground lurches before he can get a good look at anything else. It undulates, causing Izuku to lose his balance, and he has the sense that he's standing on something alive in the truest sense. Everything vibrates for a moment, reminding Izuku of a person shivering from the cold. It stops, thankfully. When he looks up again, everything has changed. And still is changing. Geometry he shouldn't be able to comprehend rises up, and is replaced by patterns extending past infinity. And there's a dying black hole fighting something that looks like a dragon so large it might as well be a universe unto itself. And the creature that looked at him and forced Izuku to see everything flies past and pauses for a second that lasts forever to whisper a secret truth that makes Izuku's ears bleed. And the longer he looks at the world, the longer he understands how vast it truly is, and how insignificant the human race is, because how can they matter when a crystal nightmare is killing light, especially if all this madness is simply a microcosm in a realm where infinity has been measured and found lacking and quantum mechanics operate on a macro scale. And Izuku fucking forgets. The world snaps back to a veneer of normality. He inhales, falling to the ground. His eyes burn, and it takes him a moment to understand they aren't literally on fire, but simply bleeding. And so are his ears from the secret the creature whispered. A secret that he wants to forget, but can't because it's written in his bones now. Life equals sign, null equals sign, entropy equals sign U. He claws at his ears, scratching the skin there badly. But Izuku doesn't care because he isn't that, can never be that. This is worse than the song Waiting Tone Thecycly of Life and Birth. Izuku focuses on that instead, even if his heart is about to explode the longer he thinks about the song. But the song isn't about him. If anything, he's just a casual bystander, and not the subject matter. The weight of the song makes him cough blood. It is killing him, and he knows it will kill him faster and faster the longer it goes on. But he need only die a little until he can hide the secret in the deepest recesses of his mind, down past where even his instincts reside. And once he's certain his mind will unravel long before he finds the secret, Izuku locks it with the song that is killing him in the here and now. He's lying on the ground, breathing heavily. He wipes away the blood on his eyes, spits out the dark, congealed wad of blood in his mouth, not caring that it grows legs and runs away moments later. He scrubs away the blood from his ears and neck, wincing when he irritates one of the scratches there. No, no, no. The voice he tries to ignore screams in agony. You left me with them, you fuck. You left me. Izuku shrugs and ignores the voice. He knows it'll find a way back at some point, probably a lot saner than Izuku by then. For now, though, it means his mind is blessedly quiet. This might be a good time to go home. Izuku nods and stands on wobbly legs. He hears a skittering-like sound and looks behind him. Standing between him and the doorway that will take him home is a dark mass of creatures, multi-legged, fuzzy, and with fangs that remind him of a spider. And right at their head is the same wad of blood that had run away, larger and meaner looking as though it had aged a few years and been forced to survive the nightmares of this place. Held in place by a twisted carapace is a glowing orb of red. Instinct tells Izuku that is the blood the creature was born from. And it hates Izuku. He can feel it deep within his soul that this thing hates him and will always hate its progenitor. Izuku steps back cautiously. The creatures step forward as one, their sharp clawed appendages tearing through the concrete which leaks shadow. Another step back, and they mimic his action. The lead creature skitters forward, and like a tidal wave the rest follow. Their very movements tear through the ground, even as Izuku turns to run. They are fast despite their size, and the lead one is on him in moments. Please work, he thinks, taking another step back. He can feel the shadows, and whilst Izuku doesn't know all the rules of this place, he does know one fact. The shadows belong to him. So, when he calls on them, they rise like lances, thousands of thin lances that eviscerate the creatures. Izuku trembles at the fangs an inch from his face, gleaming with fluid and large enough to tear through bone. A dark lance holds the blood spider creature in place, pierced through what might been a head in a normal creature. The hate is still there in its dozen crystal eyes, but deeper down Izuku can see despair and even betrayal. He watches the creature die, slowly and crooning in pain. And when the infernal engines powering the creature fail, it dissipates to ash, leaving behind only that glowing red orb. The orb floats by its own will, defiant of gravity or any other force. His hand reaches out, unbidden, and grasps the orb. It leaves his hand numb and tingly all at once. There is a multitude of, he doesn't want to call them souls because he refuses to equate what he has to those creatures. They died, Izuku thinks, and looks at the legion of spider-like corpses. But they're still dreaming. It feels wrong to just throw the orb away. There are hundreds of lives begging to continue their dreams, and Izuku doesn't know how to deal with it. Throwing it away is simply leaving them to die a slower death. He puts it in his pocket and decides to forget about it. He's become good at it. He walks over spider corpses and puts them far from his mind. He flinches whenever a leg twitches with a hot wind carrying the scents of rotting fish and fresh blood. When one of them rises, body reconstructing as though time reversed, and red light streaming from his pocket to it, Izuku crushes it with his foot. It makes a pitiful sound as Izuku stomps on it again and again and again and again, until it goes back to its dreams. He wipes away the blood from his mouth, wondering how it got there, and realizes he's already at the door. He ignores the lightness of his pocket and the crystal shards scratching his gums. Those spider creatures are a distant memory when he steps through the door. TDB. TDB. Water clings to him when he returns. He thrashes for a moment until he remembers where he is submerged in a tub and why his forearm is still numb. He looks at the red water for a long time, thinking of nothing. He pulls the plug and lets the water drain. It's odd seeing evidence of what he did disappear. He stands, dripping wet when the water's ankle high. Something nicks him, and he yelps, jumping out the tub. There's a tiny scratch on his ankle. He investigates the tub, sees bits of shredded wood and metal at the drain. It reminds him of both the pole and the fridge. Just another thing to note down. It takes him nearly an hour to scrub every surface down. His fingers are raw and bloody by the time he's done scrubbing the blood out of his clothes. Next time don't wear clothes, he thinks. Pauses. Scrubs more vigorously at the idea that there will be a next time. He's only just managed to shower and disinfect the scratches near his ears when his mother returns. Izuku, I'm home, she shouts from the doorway. She probably has groceries with her. Izuku freezes. His mother comes back at 6 on weekdays. He looks at his watch. The time there reads 8 o'clock. What the fuck? TDB. TDB. The shadows feel acuter after that. There is a level of detail that is overwhelming, and sometimes he must leave class and spend time in the bathroom, breathing, and not at all having a panic attack. Sometimes a student must come find him a few moments from a full-blown panic attack and bring him back to class. And sometimes he's bleeding too heavily from the nose to go back to class. He avoids questions from concerned teachers, and even a trip to the school counselor yields no answers. When they call in his mother, she simply stares them down, imperious and regal in a way only affronted parents manage, until they allow her to take him home. He cries when they get home, and she hugs him tight as he tells her stories of the dreaming dead and old gods being born and abominations that keep him up at night. She simply holds him tight. Her routines change around him. Not significantly after the first night she checked up on him at night, and found him beating off they both agreed that wouldn't work, but enough that he loves her all the more for it. She speaks to him on matters that he enjoys and grounds him during the bad times. One night where he's too afraid to sleep from the voice screaming bloody murder in his head, she takes him out for ice cream and a stroll through the park. And whilst the scents of grass and damp and life calm him, the spiders make him nervous, and there isn't enough contrast between dark and light for shadows to really exist, leaving him feeling almost blind. One weekend, when he starts to remember everything he hides deep down, and the weight of it all leaves him breathless and feverish and writing higher dimensional mathematics in a language humans can't vocalize and in his own blood. She pulls him away gently and teaches him to play blackjack and how to count cards, and every technique from the simple high-low to the more complex wong-back counting helps him forget the madness. And he doesn't mind learning more of his mother between explanations of arbitrage and matched betting, of how she met his father by conning him at a friendly game and then dazzling him with a card trick. A trick she shows him even though his hands shake too much for him to really learn it. He starts packing her lunches and making breakfast in the morning, even if it means sleeping less. Cleaning the house is mind-numbing and boring and so blessedly peaceful that he cries the first time he does it. His mother doesn't try to stop him, except for days where he puts off doing homework, because she won't permit his grades to drop, not when he's trying so hard to get to UA. It makes him guilty and forces him to work harder. So, when he's training he goes there tired. He steps back from a punch form Jin Mo Rai but fails to notice the ledge behind him. Izuku falls to the ground, hitting his head hard. He winces and blinks away stars. When he can see properly, Jin Mo-rai is squatting beside Izuku. It takes Izuku a moment to notice he's staring at his exposed forearm. He pulls back and covers up the scar. "I will not ask," the man says without pity or kindness. "But I do not waste time. If you do not want to get to Yua, tell me, and I will leave." His eyes widen. "Wait, no, I want to be a hero." The man with crosses in his eyes simply blinks lazily. "Not if you die first." "I've died a lot," Izuku thinks bitterly. "I'm not trying to die," he retorts, and it is true to an extent. Jin huffs. "The heart is weak, even if flesh is strong." Izuku squints at the man. Coming from someone who goes around with his torso exposed. The black coat the man wears has only a single button around his collar, and with the way it is cut, most of his torso is exposed at any given time. "I," he says, poking Izuku in the forearm, "have quirk that extends invulnerability to my clothes and makes them stronger than my flesh. You, little shadow, are weak and have no armor." But they say no more of it after that. 2 days a week, as he promised, Jin Mo-rai teaches him how to fight, and the rest of the time All Might trains his body. He puts on muscle rapidly, but he never becomes bulky like his hero. Instead, all the fat disappears, and it seems some days that his muscles never run out of endurance. In gym classes, he might not be able to lift as much as the other students, but he can lift much longer. In the few minutes he has that aren't dedicated to school or training, or learning about his quirk, and not going catatonic from the revelations, he takes the notebook with the sketches of his costume and modifies it. The white lines feel wrong and disingenuous to what he is, and he colors them black. The rabbit-like mask was something he built in homage to All Might, but he wonders whether he is worthy of being the man's successor when he has monsters in his closet. He replaces the grinning teeth with a metal mouth guard and keeps a cowl with rabbit ears, an acceptable compromise. He's not certain about the armored vest, but he remembers Jin Mo-rai's words and decides protection can never be a bad thing. Izuku spends one Friday evening and does absolutely nothing. He ignores his quirk by keeping everything well lit and sets his homework aside. The couch is comfy. He switches on the TV and lets the inane robot show wash over him, focusing instead on his book. His mother finds him like that, not busy or frantic or half mad, and sits next to him. She dozes off after a few minutes. Izuku grabs a blanket and throws it over her, tucking her in gently. His life is busy and horrifying. But Izuku wouldn't change it for a moment. It belongs to him and no one else, no matter the consequences. The age of heroics has brought about a technological stagnation. Even after the glories of the past were reclaimed in the Golden Age, we have hardly advanced one iota. The body of knowledge has decreased, and students care more for the flash of heroes than they do for sciences grounded in knowledge and economics based on historical patterns. I hold all who call themselves a hero accountable. We look to them as saviors and become complacent with our lot in life. By their very existence, they hold back advancement. There was a time when advancements were commonplace. New industries created often, and the people driven to make something with their own knowledge. That time has ended. Excerpt from The Effect of Heroics by Saruhiko Ando. Izuku focuses as hard as he can, ignoring the budding headache because this might be the one. His shadow vibrates on the ground and Izuku's hands shake with exertion as he does his best to pull the darkness out. He watches, mesmerized, as a single tendril of shadow rises in the real world. "Yes," he shouts, and the laughs hysterically. He has finally done it. This is proof that he wasn't completely mad. This is his bedroom in the waking, and a thin tendril of shadow undulates in the air, indifferent to the impossibility of a shadow having volume. He pokes at it. It makes a clear sound and Izuku pauses to wonder if it's a normal sound or one that exists outside of sanity. He shrugs as he long ago lost any claim to sanity. He grabs it, pulls. In his hand, he holds what might be considered an incredibly long needle. He nearly presses his finger to the sharp tip before deciding that might not be the best idea in the world. Instead, he pokes his pillow and watches it sink deep without the slightest hint of resistance. He raises a brow, wondering how it would fare against something harder. He raises the needle, aims at the wall, throws it. Partway there, it unravels and wisps of darkness float through the air for a second. Izuku watches them fade away like ashes after a volcanic eruption. "Fuck," he curses. "It took me an hour to do that." He takes a deep breath and calms himself. Making another one is slightly easier. There is a pattern, an understanding of impossible physics that seems to imprint itself on his mind. It only takes him an hour this time, instead of the just over an hour. The tendril is thicker, less fine gossamer thread and more strand of hair. He decides not to pull it out of his shadow. Closing one eye, he holds the image of a circle in the back of his eyelid and watches it ponderously twist to the shape of his commanding, a single strand still connecting it to his shadow. It isn't fast, and there's a resistance here that the other world doesn't have. He watches the circle revolve slowly, imagines it sharpen, and hears a hum of acknowledgement from it. And then, with a single command, he watches it fly across the room and stab halfway through his wall. It makes him smile. It's the first real progress he's had in a while. Getting back to the dark below is difficult, and whilst he can sometimes feel himself sinking, he never gets all the way there. So, he does what he needs to, and becomes very creative in the ways he dies. He finds the knife too time-consuming in terms of cleanup, and anyway he doesn't want to go to the effort of hiding new scars, or explaining away why he needs a local anesthetic. Drowning is a deeply terrifying experience, and one he has no intention of trying again. Death by hanging is the simplest, cleanest, and most efficient way of getting to the place. He learns the flavors of death, becomes close as lovers inexorably twined till the end of time. The impossible scent you smell before you die reminds him of petrichor, the first rains of the season, but both sharper and subtler. He comes to know the feeling of his brain shutting down, the terror of forgetting the who, what, why that a person instinctively knows through the lives. Learns the sensation of nerves firing one last time, raging in defiance against numbness as a war god does against his enemies. 4 notebooks he leaves in his room, 3 on his quirk, and 1 completely blank just in case before going to his new favorite place. He's walked the path towards it so often that only the bravest creatures do anything but run immediately. And the brave ones are less courageous than they are mad and foolish, as don't survive more than a few seconds, sometimes impaled by a dark spear, and sometimes crushed by a flood of shadows. Izuku isn't the biggest or most dangerous creature, even cloaked in shadows that whip and strike his enemies. No, there are creatures that still make him shiver in terror. He can keep this realm relatively sane by anchoring a portion as large as he wants to see to his shadows, and the space in his mind where he forgets many things. It creates a temporary world that obeys laws he understands. Sometimes his concentration falters, and he sees the infernal nightmares just lurking in the background, like the dragon mostly eaten by a black hole in the distance, or the light killer tower hovering over everything. There are spots slightly better than others. Despite the revulsion he feels, the beached whales are quite peaceful, and their cries tell a story of a people long dead who have chosen to continue no matter their form. It takes him a long time to realize they're just as scared of the real monsters hiding in the depths as he is, so they hide near the surface. They are pitiful, but never malicious. They speak freely of their memories of true life, not this eternal undeath they suffer through. Every word of planets burning, and a people enacting a mad plan that went against all mortal and esoteric laws, makes him love humans just the tiniest bit more. None of that interests him as much as the forest of floating trees. The trees are the largest he's ever imagined, taller than the sky and wider than his neighborhood. He can't tell if they're a single creature or a collective, for they move in eerie synchronicity, sometimes going to depths Izuku hates following, and sometimes being right outside the safe spot of his room. But something there is calling to him, and he can't ignore it. There is little light in this place, so Izuku always brings a headlamp and a powerful torch as a backup to create the contrast he needs to work his powers. It has the unfortunate side effect of alerting the denizens to his presence. He dodges a spear and raises a shadow shield before another can strike him through the face. He's yet to die here, and has no plans on finding out how permanent it is. So, he sends a fist of shadow to the creature trying to flank him. It is much larger than Izuku, made up entirely of very elastic purple-black threads that stretch and elongate easily. It makes fighting them hard because he can never be too sure which direction they'll attack from. It also makes fighting them fun. His shield shatters. Izuku ducks low an instant before a claw takes his face, slipping a bit on the uneven route. He grimaces as the blow tears a line through his shoulder, and sweeps the creature of its legs that are only sometimes there before backing away. There's one in the air. Izuku sends a series of shadow bullets at it, and watches in satisfaction as it falls out the sky. The one he shoved aside earlier charges Izuku, one arm stretching and closing the distance rapidly. He scrambles to the side. Fails to stick the landing. Hits his hurt shoulder on the massive tree root. The 3 creatures regroup. He curses. Why won't they back down? Izuku wonders as he dodges another spear. And where the hell do they get all the spears? After a week of fighting these creatures, each time he enters the forest, Izuku still has no idea. But there's something at the center of the forest that beckons him, a heady pull he can never resist. And he really, really wants to know what it is that draws his attention so. Have you tried talking to them? The voice says, distracting Izuku and making him take a blow to the chest from the flying creature. He lashes out with his elbow, kicks it across its dark face, slams it with a wave of shadow, and watches it fall of the massive root. Great, you're back, Izuku thanks and forges another shield. It holds up against the spear thrower, and is too tall for even the other one to wriggle around, even if it does extend its limbs. He has to watch his right flank because of his injured shoulder, but he has a selection of lances ready to fire given the slightest provocation. Of course, I did, Izuku says, trying to calm his breathing. I nearly lost an eye because of it. No, you didn't, you idiot, give me a moment. Everything is silent in his head for a moment. And then he hears screams and the voice raging at something. He can hear sounds of battle, the clang of immutable ideas clashing with entropic chaos. That makes Izuku pause. Great. Now the voices in my head actually do stuff. When it returns, it brings with it static. The voice sighs in relief. You never tried talking to them. Izuku's protests are cut off as the voice simply continues. How do you speak to your shadows? Izuku frowns. He doesn't, as far as he can tell. Okay, either shut up or go away. Blessedly, the voice goes away. A roar rends the air. Izuku leaps back instantly, not in the slightest shocked that his barrier breaks. Concentration has something to do with the strength of his constructs. The large, bulky one elongates from the neck. Its head is like a bullet full of sharp teeth. Izuku ducks down, pulling his shoulder wound, and decides this might be as good a time as any to get the hell out of dodge. He bolts to the right. He nearly takes a spear to the neck before he reaches the edge of the giant root. He doesn't hesitate to leap down. There is water beneath him. He hates going deeper into the abyss when he can avoid it. But the doorway he senses one level down can take him 2 levels left and 1 up. He's not sure exactly how space and geometry behave other than that they sometimes exist. More often he has to force them to exist. The creatures in the air ignore him, thankfully, though one that's a cross between a seagull, a lizard, and a gas cloud does inspect him for a long time. It hurts his brain a bit to see organs held suspended in a gaseous liquid fade and reappear with each beat of its wings. With a grin, Izuku waves at it. It turns away and Izuku watches it dive down, its wings turning gaseous, then back in sequence. Izuku takes in a deep breath well before he hits the pink water. He has no intention of swallowing the intraocular fluid of a creature whose eye is probably larger than Russia. It is warm and sticky, disgustingly so. He pushes his revulsion away and swims to the bottom, where he can sense the doorway. Halfway there, he runs out of breath, vision going dark in spots. It makes him curse because he hates drowning. But he's long ago accepted doing crazy things to get what he wants. There's no air here, and if he holds his breath long enough, then the lack of oxygen will kill him. And that isn't an option. So, he takes a deep breath and lets the thick, sticky fluid fill his mouth and lungs. The dark spots disappear as he breathes the ocular fluid of the creature. Izuku swims until he reaches the bottom, as brightly lit as the surface, which should bother Izuku. But glowing eyes aren't really anything special at this point. He takes a knife from his pocket and stabs it through the surface. A dark fluid spurts out in long arcs like ink in water. Izuku doesn't breathe it in. He works his knife quickly, forming a simple rectangle. Already, the horizon is darkening from the creature closing its eye. And when it closes fully, Izuku knows he'll be completely fucked. Instinct has rarely failed him in the place. When he's made the slices, Izuku grips the flaps and pulls with all his strength. It takes nearly half a minute before he can pull the flesh off completely and reveal the shimmering doorway. Izuku steps through before darkness overtakes him. He falls out onto the surface of a dead star, wincing as he lands on his shoulder again. He checks the wound, finds it already scarring instead of bleeding. He shrugs, wiping away the ocular fluid on his face. Ocular fluid has healing properties. He thinks so he can jot it down along with the eye's location in his notebook later. There aren't any landmarks on the flames forever frozen, and dark, so Izuku simply picks a direction and walks. His watch tells him it's close to midnight. Good, lots of time to get back before his mother found whatever his body did when he died. TDB. TDB. The next few days are busy and frantic. Time's running out, and he starts feeling the pressure of everything. Tests and pop quizzes at school stop being a surprise and more of a daily occurrence. Despite their migraine-inducing difficulty, Izuku manages to keep on top of them. It might mean having to spend time in the abyss to take advantage of the weird temporal mechanics there for the deeper he goes. The slower time in the real world passes, and he's certain that if he goes deep enough, there's a place where an eternity will last shorter than the blink of an eye in the real. And perhaps even deeper, there's a place where the reverse is true. It is Saturday when he receives a text from All Might that something has come up, and he won't make it for their training. Izuku shrugs. It is not the first time this has happened. After All Might is still a hero with duties and obligations. And whilst Izuku knows little of the man's personal life aside from his name, he has no doubts that the training has stopped him from taking care of his personal life. Kasan, he greets in the kitchen as he mixes a protein shake. She smiles at him, the skin tight on her face. Not in a bad way, and it makes him pause because when had his mother lost weight? She looks healthier, and he wonders if it's because he takes care of more of the cleaning, giving her more personal time. She ruffles his hair, hand lingering on the scar where the hair has grown in white. He chose not to dye it because every time he looked in the mirror, it reminds him that death is always a mistake away. And death means his secret might be revealed. And regardless of how odd it might look, or how it made him an easier target for the bullies at school, he will forever cherish how Kachan told those assholes to fuck off. He's not sure how to deal with Katsuki when he's being so nice is a stretch, but not intentionally violently antagonistic. And maybe we can be friends again, Izuku thinks, and that brings a smile to his face. He hears a snort in the back of his mind. Don't forget what he did. The voice roars and then cackles madly. Izuku rolls his eyes and ignores it. You doing all right, honey? She asks, smile strained just a bit. He chuckles nervously, scratching the back of his head. He nearly knocks over the protein shake. Just zoned out a bit. Then he notices how she's dressed up a bit. Are you going anywhere? I can make dinner if you're coming back late. Her smile turns towards fondness. You're too sweet. Izuku ducks his head, flushing. I wanted to show you something special, but if you need to train, we can do it later. Izuku looks up, sees her kind expression, puts the protein shake in the fridge. Sure, I can take a run in the evening just as well. They're in the car, shitty pop music blaring, and talking about nothing in particular. He shuffles a deck of cards, palming a card every now and then, and trying a card trick his mother had shown him a few days ago. She laughs when he messes up, and the card hits him straight across the face. She laughs harder when it sticks to his forehead. He drops the entire deck when she stops abruptly, cursing at the pedestrian who decided jaywalking was perfectly acceptable in the middle of a busy road. He reaches down to pick up the cards, then freezes. Some of them are sinking into his shadow. Izuku swallows and reaches towards it. His hand sinks in slightly. He closes his hand and pulls back. Inside his clenched fist are the few cards that had sunk in. Izuku? His mother questions, eyes flicking to him, and then back to the road. He shrugs. New to me. And quite frankly, it's not particularly worrying compared to many of the things he's seen. He tells her as much, which only makes her frown. You're sure you don't want to go to a counselor? Izuku rolls his eyes. This isn't the first time she's suggested it. This isn't anywhere near as bad as the maths on the wall thing. That's my point. You wrote that in your own blood. It hurt my head to look at it, and you think that's a normal thing. She sighs. Izuku, I can do the proof for a Gaussian integral in my head. I didn't even know how to do basic calculus before then. He has nothing to say to that. Sorry you're smarter now, he offers, only a little petulant. She sighs, before pulling over and parking. Just promise me you won't keep things from me. What if they're not my secrets to tell? He asks, stepping out the door. He looks up and reads the sign Anteku with a frown. He's never heard of the place. If it doesn't affect you, that's fine. She walks through the door and greets the old man behind the counter. They're led to a table and given a menu. Sure, he agrees. So, why are we here again? He asks, then orders a cup of green tea, even as his mother orders some coffee that sounds more complicated than a Gaussian proof. Because you need to rest and relax. At a coffee store? Caffeine is not a relaxant, Kasan. Maybe not for you. She takes a sip of her coffee when it comes. It's strong enough that he wonders if he can get caffeinated by the vapor alone. Besides, this place is special. Are we going to play the gs? He pauses when he feels something brush against his leg. He tenses and looks down. And sees a cat. A bright orange cat that stares back at him disdainfully. His mother laughs. Izuku looks up and sees her petting a gray patterned cat. Huh, is all he says. A cat slinks along a windowsill, tail raised imperiously and leaps to the seat next to Izuku. It has one eye and black fur. He reaches out cautiously and lets in sniff his finger. It bumps his has fingers with its nose and walks right onto his lap. It circles a few times and then curls in place. Huh, he says again as the cat purrs contentedly, loud enough that he feels it in his bones. I told you it was special, his mother says. He raises his cup in acknowledgement and asks her what she's been doing in her spare time. He lets her voice wash over him, absently stroking the cat. And after nearly half an hour, she reaches into her handbag and pulls out a book. Here, she says and hands it to him. I thought you might like it. The hardcover lacks the usual cover sleeve, but he can see the author's name written in tiny gold handwriting. Hawkmoon it reads, and below that my eclipse. On the first page is writing in faded pen. Izuku looks up in shock, jostling the cat who meows in frustration. Kasan, this is a signed copy, he says in shock. These things cost a fortune. Yes, she says simply. Read the signature. He frowns. Opens the page. To a young Hisashi whom I hope to see again. From Yui whom Hawkmoon eclipsed, he reads. Then freezes. Is this? It was your father's. I forgot all about it. I guess I never wanted to look through the boxes of all the stuff he left. Izuku frowns. He's not dead. And somehow that makes her infinitely sadder. No, he isn't. She forces a smile. And I know he'd be happier with someone reading it than to let it gather dust. That's the last they speak of it. When she's ready to leave, Izuku asks if he can stay a little longer. She smiles and gives him some money before heading out. He reads the book, drinking another cup of tea, and savoring each word from one of the great heroes of history. Sometimes he must check Wikipedia to check his facts. Geography isn't in his arsenal of skill, so knowing she slew the indomitable Titan in Sao Luis means nothing until he Googles the place and sees the monument to the battle. He isn't paying attention when he stands, the cat in his arm, and knocks into someone. Startled, he reaches out and grabs a hand before the person can fall. He looks up and meets purple eyes with dark bags beneath them. Sorry, Izuku says, and lets go hastily. I wasn't paying attention. The boy stares at Izuku. Then at the cat. I've never seen you before. Mika doesn't like newcomers. He frowns. Mika, he thinks, then looks at the cat that's watching him with its single eye. This is my first time, he says quickly, anxiously. Deku. Midoriya, that's my name, Izuku, and sorry for knocking you over. I should probably pay attention more. The boy frowns. It's fine. You look tired. School tests? The boy tilts his head, almost cautious. Yes, he ventures. Izuku smiles broadly, fearlessly. Yeah, my ma brought me here cause apparently I'm too stressed or something, but hey, whatever. It's not like cats are a problem ever. Midoriya, the boy says sharply, cutting him off. It's fine. You're stressing the cat. He looks down. Sees Mika's hair raised on end. Takes a deep breath. Sorry. The boy rolls his eyes. Stop apologizing. Sore, he trails off at the boy's gaze. It isn't anywhere near as terrifying as some of the things he's seen, but he's even less sure of humans than he is of nightmare creatures. Izuku takes a seat and gestures to the opposite one. The boy sits, uncertain, and Izuku wonders if maybe something horrible is peeking through his grin. I never got your name. The boy paused. Shinsu. Hitoshi Shinsu. Hi, Shinsu, Izuku says brightly. It is odd talking to someone his age who doesn't automatically dislike him. Which school are you applying to? Shinsu looks away and reaches for the cat next to him. It scrambles up his leg and jumps to his shoulder. He still as the cat gets comfortable on its new perch. Yua, he says once the cat isn't about to tumble off. He looks to Izuku expectantly. Oh, right, that's awesome. We might even be classmates. You're applying there as well? Izuku nods. What's your quirk? Izuku freezes. He's never really thought about how to answer that question. It's never really come up, and he can't just say one for all, because that isn't his quirk. At least, not yet. Sorry, Shinsu says. Didn't mean to make you upset. Didn't you just tell me to stop apologizing? I only did it once. His voice never rises above a monotone. Izuku forces a smile. I just got my quirk, so I never really gave it a name. He points to the flare of white hair at his temple. Hidden quirk. Traumatic incident. Tried to fight a pole with my face. That's not what happened, the voice roars. Izuku's smile becomes strained as the voice screams in a voice that isn't wholly human. Are you okay? Shinsu asks. You've got a nosebleed. Izuku curses and reaches for a napkin in his pocket, placing it to his nose. Sorry. I get those occasionally. Especially when some people are screaming in my head. He thinks angrily. Can you shut up already? The voice cackles once more. 2 plus 2 is 4. Minus infinity, that's death. Quick maths. Die, you bastard, die. Izuku winces, and does his best to ignore the voice. He sees Shinsu watching him worriedly. I think I need to head home anyway, Izuku says before his head gets any worse. See you later. I guess? He must look ridiculous with a cat in one hand and a bloody napkin in the other. He makes it work as he writes his phone number down on the back of a receipt and slides it over to Shinsu. That's how people make friends from what he's seen on TV. He hasn't really had the opportunity to practice it in real life. TDB. TDB. Izuku continues to train ceaselessly. His body grows stronger, even as his training regime gets progressively harder. All Might is relentless in making Izuku stronger. The sessions get bad enough that he feels like he'll pass out in his tracksuit, even on a colder evening. He takes to wearing a long-sleeved compression shirt, so All Might never sees the scar on his arm, and leggings beneath his shorts to avoid chafing and irritating blisters. Jin Mo Rai is equally relentless, drilling the fundamentals in Izuku's head until he dreams of stances and kicks, defense flowing to offense in fluid motions. He ruthlessly takes advantage of having more time in the abyss and puts everything in practice against the less terrifying denizens. It makes him think harder, but it also helps him rely on his instincts a bit more. Nearly a week after going to the cafe, he gets a message from Shinsu. It's short, concise, and his response is just as awkward as he agrees to meet again next week. They send messages back and forth. Not many, since Izuku can tell Shinsu is just as busy as he is, and maybe just as lonely. So Izuku does put in the effort to reply as soon as he gets a message, even if his reply is stilted and awkward. And occasionally he gets a reprimand from his teachers to pay attention. Trying to communicate with another human being is difficult, and very often his intent gets lost by the barrier of screen and text. But that struggle makes him understand what the voice was saying. He drops down through a doorway and lands on a root. It takes only seconds before the stretchy creatures appear. There's the usual spear morph, but there are additional flight morphs. And this isn't really a fight he can win. Which is good, because he doesn't want to fight. I don't want to fight, he says, raising his empty hands. And then, he says it differently. It takes him a moment to concentrate on his shadow. Izuku tries his best to let his feelings resonate with his shadow. The creatures pause, and one even stumbles back. Good, that meant it worked. The spear morph walks forward on its 4 legs that stretch and contract and looms over Izuku. He trembles because he won't be able to dodge from this range if it attacks him. / you speak now after attacking us / He winces. It isn't a voice so much as it is a scalpel writing those words in his skull. Sorry, Izuku says, and sends the feelings through his shadow. I never wanted a fight. / you took joy / pleasure / revelation in combat, thief / Why are you calling me that? He asks, barely pausing to wonder how surreal the situation is. / your nature / the creature tilts its head back, and Izuku watches it elongate to one of the flighty morphs. They seem to converse, and Izuku waits nervously for its head to return. / come, robber / He frowns as the lumbering monster made of purple-black threads turns and walks away. The other creatures don't seem to care as they disperse. The walk is long, and after a day of training with All Might, it is harder than he expected. The trees lighten from the darkest night to a pale purple, maybe lavender, and grow progressively thinner. He's amazed the first time a root suddenly grows as they're about to reach an edge, but by the 8th time there isn't anything too special about it. His head whips back and forth as he tries to keep track of all the creatures living in this floating forest. Some, the flight morphs mainly, keep to the canopy, and Izuku only glimpses them the one time they ascend. The spear morphs seem content with their place in the roots. Yet he can't help but wonder how exactly the large, bulky ones are in the trees, literally in the trees. He places a hand on one of the lightest trees and is slammed with a wave of knowledge. Not eldritch knowledge that must never be spoken for fear of ending the world. No, this was the knowledge of an elder watching thousands upon thousands of generations grow and live and die and live again. He looks to the thread creature leading him. You become the trees when you die, he whispers in awe. The creature's head twists around, even as it continues walking forward. / all knowledge / wisdom / experience flows back to the source heart / They pass what might be a gate and walk into a circle of brilliantly white trees. so thin that they look like saplings. At the very center is a cauldron, and within it burns a fire of the infernal darkness, a fire that hurts to look at. It burns everything its flames reach, from the light to even gravity and time and the barriers between galaxies. And for a single instance, he sees a spark of red flames in another world. Thief / burglar / transgressor / the booming voice of 8 trees, collectively older than his universe, knocks Izuku to the ground. Have you come to repent / Izuku spits out blood, having bitten through his tongue. I'm not a thief. Your skin morph shares a kinship with the first thief / one tree older than the stars in tones. I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. Then see light bursts to life, bright and brilliant enough to boil his eyes. He screams as they force their way into his mind and make him see. The trees are the form the thread creatures take once they die. But that isn't the last stage. No, these trees billions of years old will pass on and begin life anew, infinitely wiser and more powerful. And yet, on the creation of the first elder, something broke through the tree canopy and stole it away. Thousands died under the shrill scream of the twisted bird abomination, and the elder trees could only watch as the oldest, now the youngest, had its essence ripped, its knowledge lost, and its soul bound to the abomination. The images send Izuku reeling to the ground, screaming in pain. He can feel each and every single death, can feel the horror of watching a universe's worth of knowledge destroyed in a single second. The terror and helplessness as the oldest and wisest of them was so violently taken, and the grief at all the young that died. He screams taper to a stop. Taking a shuddering breath, Izuku checks his eyes. They don't feel burnt, so he opens them. It takes time for him to adjust to the dimness after seeing that radiance. Thief, you are not though kin to the slave king, you are a tree slightly younger than Earth says. We ask your forgiveness, Shadow Shield / Izuku struggles to his feet, wiping away the blood leaking from his ears. He inhales, smelling the unique scent of ashen time. Another name? He questions. It is your name nature truth the same tree says. He rolls his ears, assuming they're referring to the many shields he used fighting the thread creatures. Regardless that he's being willfully ignorant, Izuku remembers the last truth he was told. And he doesn't want to learn another. Fuck it. I don't really care anymore. Okay, so you attacked me because I'm human. Because the skin you wear is human it says, and Izuku knows there is truth to those words. Do you understand now? The voice in his head asks. You're just a monster wearing human skin. It cackles and laughs and rants and raves. Izuku shuts it away deeper in the recesses of his mind. And now you gave me another name. Look, I just came here because that fire's been calling me for the last few days, and I'm tired of it. The eternal flame is not yours the voices roar. The force of it knocks Izuku down again. We are guardians of the god flame the youngest elder tree says once Izuku can think again. Your skin morph will not be allowed to possess it I just want to see it, Izuku says imploringly. He's being honest, too. Something that powerful terrifies him. And he knows, just knows that it can destroy worlds without thought. We will permit this Cautiously, Izuku walks forward, stepping around the spear morph. The dark flames don't give off any heat, but anything that so casually destroys gravity is deserving of respect. He looks into the cauldron at the dark flames. Fire consumes his mind, eternal and infernal. This isn't simply a flame of impossible power. No, he knows its nature as burns the shackles of his mortal mind, and he takes pleasure in hearing the voice lurking in his head scream in true pain and is amazed. Amaterasu, he calls it, though that will never describe its nature. It is only a name he can comprehend. This is the first flame, the one that birthed his universe and set entropy in motion. But it is also the last flame, the one that will cleanse the world. All legends and gods of fire are just stories told of humans who once glimpsed this magnificence. It is the beginning and end, and all that came between. By its birth embers, the formless void of creation came to know life. By its warmth entropy, and thus both life and death came to be. By its final blaze, everything will die. And when he truly understands, it pulls away and leaves his mind unharmed. Warm and brighter than the sun, yes, but unharmed nonetheless. He understands that it wanted to take his measure, and it found him. Not wanting, but too different to interested. Find my heart, it commands, a plea that writes itself in his bones and blood and mind. Izuku nods, for what else can he do in the face of this god? He avoids the abyss for a few days after that. God flames aren't something he wants to deal with right now. Instead, he puts it to the back of his mind. He doesn't bury it, for the knowledge won't break him like the rest of the things in his mind. It has the added bonus of burning the voice whenever it chose to rise to the surface. So, as he talks to Shinsu Hitoshi about the intricacies of pleasing their cat overlords, he does so with a voice screaming in agony at the back of his mind. Maybe he should care, because the screams make his nose bleed and plague his dreams and stop him sleeping. And he tastes crystal on his tongue and smells burning flesh. But all of that sounds like a lot of work, and Izuku is infinitely more interested in reading his books and training with all might and making breakfast for his mother. Those things are simple, safe, sane. All life is precious. Yes, this is an idea you have likely heard since you were a child, but life itself is precious. No, because there is a higher purpose or intelligent design or God. We can be the greatest cosmic joke, and I would still say the same. Life is precious because it is. I have taken many lives, and each is a greater burden to bear as I age. From the boys swayed by rousing speeches to the jaded old men struggling to keep their children fed, each life matters. Each life has value. That value is priceless. Excerpt from My Eclipse by Hawkmoon. Time waits for no one. This fact, Izuku was most certainly aware of. It didn't matter that he could spend more time in the deep darkness and gain a few more hours than most. Inevitably, the days would pass, and each cross on the calendar brought him closer to the final day. The day of the exam. He stares at his reflection and sees tired eyes and a face devoid of baby fat. He sees a brilliant streak of white in his otherwise dark green hair and the outline of a scar on his shoulder. It is much worse on his back, but he is thankful that Massive Eye had healed him, and the wound didn't interrupt his training. The scar on his left forearm is pale and silvery against his skin, extra care to hide it from everyone in his life. Today is his last session with Jin Mo Rai before the exam. He finds the man crouched on a pole driven deep in the ground, seemingly asleep in that impossible position. The man opens his star-like eyes and jumps down, landing easily. Izuku waves. "Hi," he says, and rolls his shoulders, wondering exactly what his teacher will make him go through today. "Today we spar," Jin says. "And we see your true skill level." Izuku sighs and removes his jacket, throwing it the wayside. Jin gives him time to stretch and warm up, even pointing out where Izuku could put more effort in. When he is ready, he falls into a basic front stance, left foot forward and one shoulder width apart from his right foot and arms held at the ready. It's a simple, solid stance that has been beaten into him. When Jin moves, it isn't anywhere near as fast as he's seen the man move, but it is still nearly too much for Izuku. He bats aside the first punch, kicks low and forward in retaliation. Jin jumps over the strike easily, even as Izuku crouches and rolls with the momentum of his kick. He springs forward just before Jin lands, and nearly takes an axe kick to his back for his troubles. He blocks it, both arms raised in a guard, even if it feels like his bones are creaking from the strength of the kick. Somehow, he feels Jin bring even more force down with his kick, and only when he sees his other knee rising does Izuku realizes the man just used his block as a pivot point. He takes the knee to the side and hits the sand hard. His side hurts, but Izuku forces himself up just quick enough to dodge the quick punch to his face. He pirouettes around his master's outstretched hand and uses that momentum to slam a knee straight in his master's unprotected side. It pushes the man back, and Izuku twists and crouches like a flash, then follows through immediately with a rising back kick. He feels it strike home, but sees his teacher has caught the strike in his intertwined fingers. He almost seems to swing forward using Izuku's extended foot as a handhold and kicks Izuku in the chest. He flies back, skimming the sand, but forces himself to flip and land in a three-point crouch. He barely has his guard up when his teacher comes at him with a fast punch. He raises his left arm to block it, feels the way it pushes him back, and all the force transmitted through his arm. Oh, he thinks, and instead of trying to take all the force, or even stepping back, Izuku lets his body twist and flicks his elbow out against his teacher's upper arm. All the force of the original blow seems to be transmitted to Jin's arm, knocking it up and leaving the man defenseless. He's seen his teacher perform that same elbow strike before. He's had to practice it a dozen times, but it never seems to compare to Jin's. But this is the first time he feels calling it Erang, the hungry wolf, and not a simple elbow strike is appropriate. Instinct guides his next strike. His left leg pivots on the spot, and his right leg lashes out. He outstretches his right arm at the same time for balance and follows through with a strike that seems to move exponentially faster. The balls of his feet meet Jin's face, and the man rises in the air. Hwechuk, he whispers in his mind. And then his leg stops. Izuku's eyes widen as the man has his hand protecting his face, balancing perfectly on Izuku's outstretched leg. He hadn't even seen Jin move. Jin grins and seems to disappear. Izuku feels a hand on his shoulder, and the next thing he knows he's upright. Good job, his teacher says, and Izuku realizes this is the first time he's seen his teacher smile. You learn important lesson, not using this so much. He pokes Izuku in the head. He frowns. I thought I was supposed to think. Not if you forget instincts. He ruffles his hair. There is balance. Thought and reaction, two halves of same whole. Let your body move instead of thinking too long and wasting force to perform both Ering and Hwechuk. Izuku tilts his head, confused. Haven't I been doing them before? Jin shakes his head. Roundhouse kick, yes. Hwechuk, no. Elbow strike, yes. Ering, no. There is difference in execution. Nuance in intent. Your body understands a bit, even if your brain is too stupid. Okay, he says uncertainly, stepping back a bit. Jin ruffles his hair, and it's the most affectionate gesture he's ever received from the man. He steps back, putting some distance between them. The secrets of renewal taekwondo will reveal themselves to you. Practice. For now, I show you the secret of Hwechuk. Something about his teacher changes. He's seen the man serious in teaching him, and even seen his wrath when All Might overexerted him and left him with a pulled muscle. His posture hasn't shifted, and his smile is still as bright as ever. And yet, something terrifying takes over the man. It is the simple knowledge that no matter what Izuku does, he cannot win against him. Run, run, run. The voice in his head screams, and Izuku is inclined to agree. But he is rooted to the spot. This will not hurt, his teacher says, the only reassurance Izuku has. And then he's right in front of Izuku, his leg raised in the Hwechuk, and barely an inch from Izuku's face. He feels the displaced air from the blow. The world shifts. He feels like time itself has stopped as another Jin Mo Rai has appeared on his side, leg raised in the Hwechuk as well. Izuku flinches back from the double vision, and then senses a third Jin behind him, leg raised in the Hwechuk. The force of the displaced wind hits him all at the same time and in opposing directions. It leaves him stunned and unable to do anything but collapse in shock. Strong arms catch him, and Izuku looks to his teacher, unable to form words. That is third stance Hwechuk, he says softly. Do you understand what I did? Izuku shakes his head. Impossible. Why you were there, and that's not possible. No one can move that fast. There were 3 of you. Izuku knows what impossible looks like. Impossible is the dead giving birth to new life. Impossible is a song that will devour all that lives. Impossible is an eye larger than the world. Impossible is a flame that will burn away the universe and start it anew. And yet, this mortal man makes Izuku understand a new type of impossibility. Anything is possible to renewal taekwondo if only once, his teacher says firmly. Do not let up your training. You might be able to win against high school bully now. TTB. He messages Shinsu occasionally, but Izuku gets the sense that they're both as stressed as each other, just in different ways. So, he doesn't force himself to reply immediately when he's in the middle of a practice test at home or on a 5-mile run early in the morning. It is odd having a friend again. The last one had been Kachin. A death for a death, the voice yells suddenly. And that had been years ago. He rubs away the blood leaking from his nose with a napkin, making sure to catch the small squishy mass that accompanies it. Throwing it away, he wonders if it's a piece of his brain or just a bit of congealed blood, and decides it won't matter. They meet up one last time at Antiku Cafe. Mika sits in his lap as he talks quickly to Shinsu, filling in the silences the other boy is content to bask in. He wonders often if Shinsu is here because he likes Izuku, or because he's just as lonely. But sometimes, out of the corner of his eyes when Shinsu thinks he isn't looking, he sees the boy stop frowning. It is a tiny thing, hardly noticeable, but it makes Izuku think that he's still capable of doing good. That moment of joy follows him as he delves deeper into the abyss, deeper than he's ever gone before. He walks across the unhallowed grave of a dead god, and when his concentration falters, the massive corpse rises, and he sees the final moments as it battled a dragon that breathed the god flame. He's nearly incinerated in this moment of the past made present, but the shadows rise, and he escapes by diving another level deeper. He's seen what comes of dead gods fighting, and the last time his mother found him on the floor bleeding from his eyes, and no words had been able to calm her. even when he stopped spouting a litany of the damned, and could explain that he had no lasting damage. He is captured by a group of what he calls Jorogumo, spider-like creatures with the head of a woman and oversized breasts, dripping putrid ichor instead of milk. They are absolutely disgusting, and after the blood spiders, Izuku has absolutely no sympathy for them, especially not after one cocoons him and nearly lays her eggs in his torso. He leaves her staked through the head and sets the nest on fire with a flare. Anything even vaguely spider-like dies instantly the moment he senses them. He has no interest in playing games with such abominations. He has a conversation with a primordial serpent, its head similar to a human's, but not so similar he would ever mistake it for one. It, and a dozen others like it, watch over a world of darkness ruled by a shambling abomination of ashen embers and darkness. Izuku stays well away from that realm because he sees the Ashen One fling lightning that shears off dragon scales. And though these are dragons of a different sort, he still respects their power. The deeper he dives, the more time he has. He sleeps in relatively safe spots like the hollowed-out husk of a giant worm or on the back of a bird carrying a galaxy on each wing, each feather the history of a dead people. One day he reaches a depth so low that the song he always wants to forget is louder than his heartbeat. It makes him cough blood, and he's about to turn back when he is surrounded by dragons. Their wings are blacker than the darkest night, and they tower over him. He fights with the shadows to keep them smaller than a skyscraper, and not the planet-sized monstrosities they really are. He waves at them and wonders just how fucked he is. Shadow Shield. You will go no further. The singer-Sendbringer's calamity must not be disturbed. The voice isn't anywhere as thunderous as he expects, and maybe that's because of the song making everything else seem less important. The idea that dragons, which are worlds unto themselves, and breathe the infernal godflame, find the things hiding further in the abyss terrifying gives him cause not to ever go back there. Yeah, I got no plans to do so, Izuku says, and lets his earnestness be communicated through his shadow. Wanna give me a ride home? We are not toys. Shadow King / one of them roars, and the world is torn asunder. Izuku wreathes himself in shadow, anchors the reality he wills against the world exploding in agony. You fucked up, the voice whispers, almost afraid to draw the attention of these leviathans. I never said you were, Izuku counters once the world has been destroyed, and all that is left is a barren moon. I just asked politely. Let's make a deal. If you give me a ride home, then I'll let you kill me if I come anywhere near them. And that is how Izuku finds himself flying cradled in the surprisingly human hands of a dragon. Realms and worlds pass with each beat of its massive wings. Izuku doesn't focus too much on the creatures lurking in the corners of space and the angles of time, because those things might break his mind again. And he's rather tired of that. He smiles uncertainly as another dragon, this one smaller than the one carrying him, takes a seat beside him. But he's seen much, much worse than a baby dragon baby, only because it is as large as a building, and not the universe of the one carrying them both, and pulls out a deck of cards from his pocket. The tricks he performs are simple, and seem to entertain the hatchling for a moment that lasts an eternity before it flies away. His life is madness incarnate. But there is a beauty to be found in odd places. There are flowers that shine with the first light of the universe, though the sight of them makes him build monuments in the night, until his mother puts a stop to it, and brings him back to the real. His eyes glow at night after that, almost like a cat. It isn't the only change. His teeth are slightly sharper, not enough for anyone but his mother to notice, but sharp enough for him to bite through his lips, and sometimes there are crystals that spill out more often, and his stomach seems to be endless. He's thankful that though he can eat 3 or even 4 times as much, he does not need to. It becomes easier to make shadow matter in the real world. It only takes him 40 minutes to bring them forth, until he has enough for a thin strand. But he can do it without spending too much concentration. He learns it is easier to let them pool in his shadow, and is thankful that they are as thinner than a plank length, unless he tells them otherwise until he's ready to use them. It lets him make thicker constructs by bidding his time. They aren't very useful, and their low density means they either shatter on impact or fade away on contact with the light. His mother listens politely as he explains all this. Then she asks if he isn't simply procrastinating, and that makes him flush. He goes upstairs and does the maths homework he's been putting off for the last 2 days. When he starts seeing nightmares in the equations, he reaches into his shadow and pulls out a deck of cards. He plays a hand of blackjack against himself, so he can let the simplicity of card counting push back the encroaching nightmares. He's tired one day, dead on his feet, and almost too lazy to get to his bedroom. He flicks on the dim hallway light, and the contrast makes all the shadows long. All he wants, with every fiber of his being, is to pass out and never wake up again. He sinks and yelps, wide awake as his shadow drags him down. He lands in the twisted reflection of his room and stares at it. Are you being serious? He asks, looking at the torn All Might poster. I just had to fucking want to get here. You idiot. Yes, you are. The voice snarls venomously. And you need to shut up, Izuku says and strides to his door, opening it. He walks out onto the hard floor. Looking around, he finds himself in the corner. The stairs make with the second floor where the shadows are deepest. He's too tired to give it any more thought until the next morning. He only manages to get back to the abyss under his own power, and not through death once more before it's the morning of the exam. They meet at the beach, All Might looking skinny in his baggy clothes 8 sizes too big. Izuku smiles shyly, waving. All Might smiles back, but it isn't anywhere near as large as usual. Morning, young Midoriya, he says and sits in the sand. He gestures for Izuku to do the same. It might be out of the norm, but Izuku lowers himself, hoping that he won't find sand chaffing his ass later tonight. Leggings are useful in that regard, but they aren't infallible. You've progressed well, All Might says, making Izuku smile brighter. You have a long way to go before you will be able to fully utilize one for all, but I believe the sheer force of it will not break all of your limbs. But there are a few things that I must address. Izuku frowns. Warily, he asks, like what? Like the scar on your forearm. Izuku looks down and sees it still hidden. At first I believed you wore the long-sleeved shirt because of the sand until I saw it one day. I wouldn't have pried if I could say with certainty that it had occurred before I met you. And whilst Jin Mo Rai has said you are fine, he is not the one who might lose a successor. Izuku stares at All Might, whose eyes shine brightly. His heart seems to want to escape his chest. His hands are shaking. He notices distantly because this was never supposed to happen. All Might was never supposed to know about any of this. I ask that you be honest with me, his hero says, gently now. He will not accept a monster. The voice in his head says, and Izuku can't help but agree. That makes him wonder just how long until he's locked in a lab deep underground and experimented on. There are nonsensical and ridiculous quirks which break every law of physics, yes, but none of them compares to resurrection. How long till they cut open his chest to see what makes him what he is? A monster, only sometimes human. And if not some shady government organization, then a villain somewhere with even fewer scruples. His eyes water as his world comes crashing down in neither a bang nor a whimper. Just the sudden realization that he will never become a hero. Can never become one. Izuku, my boy, his hero says kindly. Whatever it is, we can work through it. He lies. There can be no hope for little, broken things. How can you say that? He snaps. Maybe at his hero, and maybe at the voice because he isn't broken. You don't know. How can you know? You can't just make this better with a few words. Nothing can. All Might only smiles brighter. Depression can be treated, my boy, and I have faith in you. He pauses, staring at All Might in shock. Then he chuckles. Is that what you think this is? I don't have depression. It isn't anything. I don't have depression, he snarls, and maybe this is a mistake. But Izuku is so tired of lying and keeping secrets that he summons a tendril of shadow to his hand. I have a quirk. All Might's eyes are wide in shock, and maybe a hint of betrayal. But how? Izuku chuckles bitterly. Trauma brings out hidden quirks. He forms a thin rod with the shadow and taps it against the streak of white hair. This. All Might swallows, uncertain for the first time Izuku has known the man. Then why didn't you tell me, my boy? I would not have cast you out for it. Izuku wipes away tears, even as new ones fall. How do you tell anyone? He's standing now, pacing off the nervous energy. Like you are now. So, you expected me to just tell you I don't die, he asks, petulantly. You fucking idiot. That makes him realize what he's just said. Young Midoriya, forgive me, but I may have misheard you. Something tells Izuku that he didn't. He laughs once more, and then he pulls up his left sleeve. I slit my wrist 5 months ago. I bled out, alone and terrified. Maybe I was mad, but maybe an ending would have been better. He looks up to the rising sun. It is dawn when the shadows are long, and his powers feel strongest. And I did because a fridge fell on me and crushed me. Right there. I died right there. He points at the spot, and though the beach might be clear of trash, he can never forget the place he died a second time. It hurts to see the horror in All Might's eyes, but somehow he feels better. Maybe telling the truth is liberating, or maybe Izuku is simply a horrible person taking pleasure in pain. The first time it happened I I cracked my skull on a pole. Yeah, that pole I told you about. He turns because it's getting harder to see his hero stare at him like that. I've died a lot. More than anyone should. Young Midoriya, do you expect me to believe you come back from the dead? Izuku takes a deep, shuddering breath. He still has the shadow rod in his hand. With a simple thought, it sharpens. See for yourself. There are 4 large arteries in the neck, 2 in the front that he can easily reach, and with the sharpness of the blade, he might reach those in the back. Either way, the damage will be great enough that he'll bleed out quickly. He thrusts with the needle and feels it prick his skin, sliding beneath the topmost layer of skin. And then it stops. A large hand grips his wrist, and Izuku sees All Might the hero, larger and grander than all the rest. He isn't smiling any longer. That was reckless, he says gravely. Izuku sniffles, half blind from the tears. Would you have believed me without proof? He asks shakily. Yes, his hero says, and that makes Izuku stumble back. All Might lets him, and he falls to the ground. You are many things, Izuku, but a liar is not one of them. At least, you have never lied to me. I'm a monster, he whispers. Are you a monster for fearing rejection? All Might asks simply. Are you a monster because you want to be a hero? You hid the truth from me, but there are many things I have yet to tell you. Perhaps I am at fault for never having given you a reason to trust me. And no, that's not. It is. You are young and fallible. Scared and rightfully so. Jin often accuses me of being a bad teacher. I see now he is right now. Izuku kneels, bringing his head to the sand. I'm sorry. You're the best teacher I could ask for, he says and waits. TDB. Toshinori Yagi has seen much in his life, short as it might wind up being. He's fought villains and reformed vigilantes. He watched his mentor fall in battle, and has worried that he will never find a successor worthy of this mantle. Yes, Mirio Tagata had all the makings of a great hero, and his innate impermeability quirk would truly have made one for all invincible. But this quiet boy prostrate on the ground in forgiveness has something no one else possesses. Izuku Midoriya, who mumbled too much and questioned everything, who read the philosophies of many great heroes, and who tried so hard to be worthy of Toshinori, is worthy for one aspect above all. It isn't his kindness, for many had that. Nor is it his determination and hard work, as Mirio outstripped Izuku in that regard, or even the bond they once shared by both being quirkless. No, what Yagi sees in Izuku is such unbridled optimism in humanity that even now he is stunned by it. And now, to know that the boy he was training has another quirk. One that brought him back from the dead. And that breaks Yagi's heart, because it meant that somewhere, somehow, he had faltered, and only by grace does he still have a successor. The gut-wrenching fear of seeing the boy make a shadow blade and nearly plunge it in his jugular vein has yet to fade, and only the steel nerves of facing death multiple times stop him from shaking. It is either madness or complete surety, and nothing Izuku had done made him think the boy could be mad. Yes. Some days his eyes were blank and terrified and pleading for help, but a kind word from Yagi, or Jin Mo Rai, always seemed to banish that darkness, and on days where Yagi wondered if his efforts truly made a difference, Izuku was there with a smile that seemed to burn as the sun. Toshinori believes the boy when he says he has a quirk that defied logic because he has come to trust Izuku, come to accept him as a confidant with each time he sees Izuku check the perimeter before he changes forms. One day, once Izuku is ready and his self-esteem is much greater, Yagi will tell him everything from Nana to All for One. But he is not ready to place such a burden on the boy. He hopes that he can face the great enemy before Izuku must, and he will gladly fall in battle to ensure it if it comes to that. But if Izuku will be the one to face him, then Yagi will see him ready. And knowing that he can never truly die, that every subsequent holder of One for All will wield the same power, alleviates many of his worries. This will not be the first time another power has been added to. Nana's quirk added a measure of durability, and the third wielder added the enhanced perception that allows Yagi to see his blows, even when they move faster than sound. This boy who so feared Yagi's disdain, and perhaps Izuku fears his indifference more, may very well be the greatest holder of One for All simply because he can never fall in battle. And if he can win against age, then there will always be a symbol of peace protecting the world. With this power, the power to turn back the ultimate expression of human frailness, to wield shadows as a tool, Izuku might very well become one of the great heroes of history, and eclipse the likes of Hiro and Hawkmoon, whose shoes Yagi struggles to fill every day, and whose triumphs still shake the world. Yagi kneels and lays hands on the shoulders of his successor, forces the boy to meet his eyes, grins at him. Rise, young Midoriya, he says and helps Izuku up even as the boy cries. And hold your head up high. A hero must always be a shining light in the dark. And you, my boy, shine brighter than any other. So, clench your buttocks and feel the determination in your chest, and scream with all your might. Izuku wipes his eyes dry, sniffling. You mean? Yagi nods, and lets all for one fill his body. I could have no greater successor, Izuku Midoriya. Laugh, for you are here, and take my power, and become a hero greater than any other. A shaky chuckle escapes the boy's lips. It isn't much compared to All Might, but it is enough. How? He asks. All Might plucks a strand of golden hair. Eat this. Izuku's expression shatters. What? TDB. He stares at All Might, shaken and feeling whiplash from all the emotions. He holds a single strand of golden hair, as though it holds all the answers in the world. Huh? He asks because this isn't meant to happen in the real world. All Might almost flushes and scratches the back of his head. It doesn't matter what it is so long as you take in my DNA. Izuku blinks at the man. Decides he's eaten things much worse in the darkness. Takes the hair. Okay, he says and swallows it. Good. It will take a few hours. But you should have just enough time before the exam. But your quirk needs a name. Izuku frowns. To keep All for One a secret, I originally had it called Superpower. He tilts his head. Then laughs at the absurdity of it. That is a horrible name. You think of something better? I don't have to. All Might sighs. But it still needs a new name. Something you can own and say proudly. He frowns, never having given it any thought. He's not calling it the Abyss because he has no intention of letting anyone know about that, and anything relating to resurrection is a no-go. You are the Shadow Shield, the voice whispers. He blanks out for a second, static filling his mind. It vanishes, and he sees All Might grinning. Yes, that is a heroic name. All Might nods. Shadow Shield. I believe it suits you. That is the last thing All Might says before leaving. What did you do? He asks the voice. It doesn't respond. Izuku sighs, looking at his watch. He has 90 minutes before he needs to leave for the train station. Not much time. At least, not in the real world. It has become easier to navigate the abyss. Something about his strength with shadows lets him set a reality that won't tear his mind asunder. It has the benefit of distances becoming much shorter. He has seen entire worlds pass in the background during a short stroll. But there are places that are stable often. The beached whales, despite his general distaste, and he's come to learn that he pities their history. More than anything of them have carved a bubble that lets them continue their half-life. The eye larger than continents is always there, but the safest place he's come to trust is the forest of floating trees. Their thread-like guardians watch him. Occasionally some speak to him, but they are generally content to ignore his presence. Even when he is in the grove of ancient trees, so long as he doesn't approach the godflame. He sits in Kiza position, not and never Caesar because Jin had shown him just how slow it was to get into a ready position from that. It had taken Izuku a few weeks to resting all his weight on the balls of his feet, but he can do it comfortably now. The trees observe him momentarily before returning to their eternal vigil. He exhales deeply, unaware of how nervous he was. Then focuses on his body. One for All is somewhere in his body and here, where a large portion of his innate quirk is expressed outwardly. It should be easier to feel a foreign power. Falling in a meditative trance is difficult, as he can rarely do it in the real, since it gave the nightmares hiding in the back of his mind a gateway to the forefront, but doing so in the abyss gave them nowhere of interest to go. And the one time a parasite that followed him from a dying world sought to escape and use him as a conduit to his world, the tree guardians had torn it apart. The hours pass. Izuku feels something like lightning slowly permeate his body. He lets it progress from his stomach and to his bloodstream, touching his muscles and lungs and bones. It tingles when it reaches his spine and seems to take forever at the base before it travels up his brain stem. Finally, it stops at his eyes. Izuku opens them and finds his body glowing with power. Not much, but enough that he lets it go peacefully. His eyes snap to the sky as a streak of green lightning illuminates the world. What? He asks as the world falls dark again. He looks to the trees, finds them deep in conversation. And yet, not even one cares for him. Or the lightning. He shrugs. It might just be a normal thing then. TDB. From the kingdom does the tribute and bounty flow to the monarch. That is the order. The weak will serve the strong. This law is primordial and immutable. All follow it, from the worm gods of the fundament, and the spires singing of the final dawn, at the beginning of time to the slave king in hiding. And yet, you subvert this law. You allow your power to become one with the dark below. What now will the future long past hold from your actions? Regardless, do as you please, young king. It is by your sacrifice that we live, and by the tribute of your kingdom that you will outlive all. All actions are possible for you if only once. The abyss is your home, Izuku Midoriya. We have waited for eons in ignorance for you. We can wait years yet. TDB. He boards the train, headphones cranked to full to drown out the sounds of everything screaming in his mind. It only gives him a worse headache. Thankfully, he has come to learn how to function with them. Even if this one feels worse than usual. It might have something to do with how the shadows he feels become more acute or blurrier, with neither rhyme nor reason. Or how he can feel much further, or suddenly a few feet away or nothing at all. The bright sunlight makes it worse. It might not be noon, but when he can feel shadows, they are weakened in the light. So, he doesn't sense him before he speaks. Deku, Kachin shouts, though that says little about his mood, and Izuku turns nervously. Stay the fuck out of my way. Deku steps back, waving his hands erratically. In morning. Shut the fuck up, Kachin snarls and reaches into his pocket. He throws something that Deku barely manages to catch. And stop looking like a stupid fuck. Kachin walks past him before he recovers. He stares bewildered at the pocket tissues, now in his hand, until a drop of blood lands on it. He frowns and takes a tissue out, placing it on his bleeding nose. He tilts his head back and watches Kachin stalk away. Why is he being so nice? He wonders because Kachin's hardly so much as laid eyes on him for the last few months. A secret, the voice says, almost tiredly. And I won't tell you because you'll just lock me up again with the fire. Then stop being a nuisance, he says and turns. He stumbles over his own foot. Izuku curses, and uses his rotational momentum to pirouette tightly on the spot, extending one leg and catching himself in a crouch. He winces, his ankle twinging painfully. Hey, are you okay? A bright voice asks. That was really cool the way you caught yourself. Izuku turns, thankful for his training with Jin, because at least he has enough balance to catch himself if he falls. The girl who said it is rather plain looking, but for the brown hair Izuku swears is more orange than brown, and the kindest expression he's ever seen from another person. Okay, he says, unsure of how to accept the compliment. She smiles and Izuku wonders how there can be two suns in the real world. It would have been bad luck to fall before the exam. Good luck. She's off before Izuku can say anything else. He mumbles, good luck, lamely at her as she skips no. She's just walking, but Izuku didn't know steps could be happy away. He shakes his head, still confused. First Kachin, and now this girl. I like her, the voice says. She looks tasty. Izuku rolls his eyes. And you say you don't like fire. And just like that, the voice is screaming in agony as Izuku walks up the stairs. He checks for Shinsu. Frowns when he can't find him since they agreed to meet up. Then checks his phone. There's a series of messages, and he can't help but smile. Zrena 3 Shinsu. Sorry, running late. Zrena 5 Shinsu. Sick cat puked on my uniform. Zo915 Shinsu. Missed my train. Gonna be late. Don't wait up on me. Izuku sends off a quick picture of him smiling at the entrance before putting his phone away. It takes him a moment to adjust to the darkness, and a moment longer to realize they're grouped by school. There's a boy with shockingly red hair talking with a horned girl with purple skin, and the two seem to be laughing with the ease of old friends. Kachin doesn't look at Izuku, doesn't speak, except when he's mumbling loud enough that it becomes a distraction. It is nowhere near as embarrassing as an immaculate boy chews him out, and everyone stares at him. He sinks deeper into his seat as the spotlight lands on him. Fucking side characters, Kachin growls loud enough that the people around him turn away. Deku glances at him as President Mike resumes with his explanation. His once friends I remember what he did eyes smolder. Deku looks away quickly and focuses on the various robot silhouettes on the screen. He still has them on his mind when they're assembled before a massive door. And Izuku's coming to realize that Yua has a flair for the dramatic, even if it is tempered with modernity and pragmatism, unlike the excesses of the past. He dabs at the blood leaking from his nose as his headache gets worse. The brightness and the way his erratic senses play havoc with his concentration mean that he misses it when the exam starts and must play catch-up. Sometimes shadows appear in his senses, and it costs him precious seconds each time to turn and find that no, that's just the 7th building he's been distracted by. And when he does find a robot, he is too slow to even get ready before someone else destroys it. His hands shake as time runs out, and he doesn't have a single point to his name. His frustration gets bad enough that he smiles at a blonde boy who fires lasers, and from the way the boy flees, Izuku probably let a bit of the madness shine through for a moment. Izuku wants to run and hide. He's become good at it over the last few months. He's seen nightmares and monster and creatures a step away from being a god. And none of them compares to the shame of not being able to do anything. His quirk, his real quirk, is useless here, even if it wasn't fighting him. It will take too long to draw a tendril of shadow in the best case, and even then, it will very likely be too weak to pierce the robots. So, he runs even as the others rain down destruction. Ice and lightning and explosions filling the world. The world seems to rock and shake. A shadow of gargantuan proportions covers the street and the surrounding building before it appears. It towers over the buildings, menacing and utterly overwhelming. Those other robots that he had sought to flee from are nothing compared to this god of steel. He stumbles and falls face first, frozen in shock. Not because this is the largest creature he's ever seen, but because it's the first time he's seen something of such absolute physicality that doesn't break his mind. Others run by him, shaking Izuku out of his reverie. He rises to his feet, ready to run when he hears someone grunt in pain. He looks to the side and sees a girl trapped beneath the rubble. His mind freezes. He can't pull her out. He doesn't have the strength to do so, and the metal deity is approaching, ponderously slow. He knows that he lacks the strength to fight it. Even the others who fought so easily are fleeing. What can Izuku do in the face of a behemoth? But he can't leave her. Izuku curses and stands. She meets his eyes and Izuku simply grins at her. Brilliant and undoubtedly bloody from his nose. "Hey, again," he says, walking towards this machine god. He stares at its descending arm, inevitable as a landslide. It could kill easily and cause so much destruction. And yet, Izuku finds it wanting. Pathetic, the voice in his head says, and Izuku agrees for once. TDB. Uraraka stares at the robot in horror and struggles to fight free of the rock trapping her leg. She hates this, hates being weak when she was doing well. 28 points probably weren't anywhere near as much as the guy leaving a good chunk of the exam area frozen. But it could have been enough. And now she's trapped and helpless. She gasps when she twists something wrong, unshed tears burning her eyes. She raises her head and sees someone. It's the boy with the streak of white hair, the boy who stopped himself falling with grace, the boy whom she hadn't seen fight a single robot. He's on the ground, looking as terrified as she felt. And then he changes. It's not a mutation or a quirk at all, but something about him completely shifts. He stands, all the fear gone, and bares his teeth in what might generously be called a smile. It's too sharp and haunting and vicious and bloody. And yet, it calms her. "Hey, again," he says to her calmly. His fingers splay out and clench over and over again as he walks, as he stalks towards the 0-pointer. The awkward boy she remembers nearly tripping now has the gait of a predator hunting prey at night. He looks up to it and sighs, disgusted. She wonders how he can have so much contempt for something even the tyrant titan would have praised. For a fraction of a second that seems to stretch forever, green sparks dance across his body glowing and his shadow darkening. And then he moves. She can barely track his trajectory as he leaps from the ground and rises above the robot. He twists in the air and brings his leg down. Uraraka might not be well versed in combat techniques, but she recognizes an axe kick when she sees it. She watches, amazed, as the force of his blow destroys the robot's head, as though it were nothing more than an irritant. "Huh," she says, dumbly. Because anyone with a quirk that strong should have been leading the pack. Explosions rack the robot, chunks of its armor crumbling, and some scent flying away. She looks on in horror as a piece of metal strikes the boy head on. His body goes limp in the air, and the power that seemed to surround him disappears. He's far from her, knocked off course by that piece of metal. She grimaces, knowing what she has to do and hating it all the while. But she knows that the pain in the moment will be nothing compared to the pain of regret if she does nothing. She moves quickly, for she has little time. She taps the rubble, lightening it almost to nothing, and shoves with all her strength. It goes flying and hits a building. She doesn't care that the building groans ponderously or that it creaks threateningly. Instead, Ochako uses her power internally. Nausea comes immediately, but she shoves it to the side. She wants to be a hero, and not being able to save the boy, especially when she has the power to do so, would, in her opinion, make her just shy of a villain. Her leg hurts, and something might be broken. Ochako ignores it, crouches, and with one deep breath, she launches herself in the air. Nausea makes the world spins, But despite Ochako sees, she'll overshoot the boy. Fine. She cancels her power and gravity once again takes hold of her. She reaches out and grabs the boy's arm, lightening him with hardly a thought. It takes all she has to focus on their fall. She uses her other arm and wraps both arms around him, twisting so that it is her back that will hit the ground first if she fucks up. Her breathing comes quick and short as the ground comes closer and closer. At the last moment, she applies her quirk on herself. Instantly, her momentum is arrested. Nausea comes back with a vengeance. Gently, she shoves the boy to one side and leans to the other. She doesn't fight it this time as her stomach rebels. She's only thankful she manages to aim the vomit away from her body. Time's up, Present Mike screams. Ochako sighs and looks to the unconscious boy. His legs are bent at odd angles. She winces, amazed that he remained awake through that, and only an errant piece of metal took him out. For someone with such a strong quirk, she wonders how he could have been so skittish and afraid for all that the fear disappeared for a second. And she feels pity that no matter his strength, he hadn't won any points. No, she whispers, because no one that brave deserved to be denied entrance to UA. So, when the short old lady that heals the boy, and insults him for being so reckless, gives Ochako the all clear, she runs to present Mike. It doesn't matter that the man might not be dispensing points. She's not going to let the boy fail. No matter the cost. She argues herself hoarse with Present Mike, and then the principal, who almost terrifies her to silence, until she remembers that bloody grin who concedes defeat and calls all might. The presence of the greatest hero of her time quells the fire and passion she has. I am here, All Might says. Young Uraraka, I take it. I understand and sympathize with your conviction. But I give you my word that UA considers all factors when evaluating a student. This is a campus for heroics, and heroic actions are not ignored. That is enough for her. TDB. Izuku sits in the lounge 3 days after the entrance exam, listless in a way he hasn't felt in a long time. Even the voices in his head are silent. Nothing seems to matter now that he's failed. He can't contact All Might, and Jin Mo Rai seems to have vanished into the ether, though he did send a curt busy this morning as a reply. He reaches for the barbell on the floor. No more, his mother says a moment before the barbell flies away. He looks back and sees the barbell land on the floor next to his mother. You are not going to waste away, she says sternly. Izuku sighs. Kasan, I failed. It's over. You think a single arbitrary exam is the end of your life? It happened. Get over it. I can't, he shouts and wipes away the tears. She looks unimpressed. Izuku, I've seen you break enough times over the last few months, and helped you pick up the pieces. You've had a setback, and it hurts. Believe me, I know. But are you telling me you can't do any good if you don't go to that school? He sniffles. It was my dream. She smiles gently. Your dream was to be a hero. UA was just one path. It isn't the only one. He offers her a shaky smile, but it comes out more of a grimace. It still hurts. I never said it shouldn't. And it will hurt for a long time. Didn't Ando say, so long as you have the will, any place can be paradise? He stares at her, then laughs. Hawkmoon said that. But you're right. He stands and walks to her, hugging her tightly. He lets go and nods at the barbell. When did you get so strong? When you needed me to be strong. She pats his head. You're my son. And she does look strong. Enough of the fat is gone that she looks younger. There's a strength to her that isn't simply physical, and Izuku wonders if it's something all mothers share. She ruffles his hair and plucks out a white strand. You lived through that. You can live through this. It isn't easy, but he does move on, even if he only takes one step forward. He leaves the safety of his home and delves into the abyss, searching for secrets. No matter how far and wide he searches, he can find no indication of the flame's heart, and more often running away from the creatures there. He doesn't use one for all, too afraid of leaving his limbs twisted in this place. But even that seems like running, so he calls Shinsu, and they meet at the cafe. The boy looks tired, and just as uncertain as Izuku. Hey, Izuku greets. Haven't seen you in a while. Shinsu sips his coffee. Well, I needed time to think about everything, I guess. Izuku nods. I'm pretty sure I failed. I couldn't get any points. Me too, Shinsu says bitterly. Punching giant robots isn't all there is to being a hero. No, it isn't. I guess it's not fair to people with quirks suited to rescue operations. Or even support roles. He strokes a cat that isn't Mika. It helps steel him to ask, finally, what is your quirk? Shinsu frowns. He takes a deep breath and sighs. You might as well know. It's called brainwash. I can take control of people if they respond to me. Izuku raises a brow. That sounds like a super useful quirk, he admits. What? Shinsu asks, voice wavering. Yeah, you could probably deal with a lot of hostage situations like that. He looks out the window. A few months ago, there was this sludge villain, and he was really hard to fight. Kamui Woods and Mount Lady were useless, and my friend nearly died. I think you could have dealt with that better even than All Might. Shinsu stays silent, and Izuku watches cars drive past the window. He hears a sniffle and turns to see Shinsu crying. Whoa, what did I say? He asks quickly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I don't even know. Shinsu raises a hand and wipes the tears from his face. He smiles for the first time since Izuku met him. Thank you. Just thank you. Izuku smiles uncertainly. I'm confused. That's because you're an idiot. There's no malice in his voice. And even then, Shinsu is looking at him like Izuku hung the moon and stars for the boy. It leaves him off balance long after they part. The warmth in his chest is odd, but not unpleasant. It follows him and brightens with each message Shinsu sends. When he's stuck in a patch of frozen time, the memory of that smile makes it easier for Izuku to power through that predicament. The trees don't understand why his mood has changed so much, and they ask if he needs healing, though the word is more like reverse entropy, which makes him grin all the more. He's almost at peace with his failure when the letter from Yua comes. He opens it with his mother. She holds him tight as All Might explains the rescue points, and shows him the video of the girl arguing so strongly for him. He cries as he sees all 65 points. The points are enough to take him all the way to 5th place. And the girl, Uraraka, has her name in 2nd. He jumps and pumps his fist in the air, and laughs when his mother catches him with her quirk before he can bash his head against the floor. Izuku smiles long into the night. When Shinsu messages him that he passed, Izuku worries that his grin will break his face. He sleeps undisturbed for the first time in a long while. Pain brings clarity. Clarity brings focus. Focus brings opportunity. Take every injury as a reminder that you are alive. So long as you live, victory is a possibility. Do not squander that opportunity. Excerpt from the Recovered Tenets of Combat, likely authored by an underground hero or vigilante. Katsuki Bakugo is angry. Everything he feels is one form of anger or another. Mild annoyance is his default, but that flares up easily to rage at the slightest provocation. And he doesn't care what his mother says about his attitude. The hypocrite. She was just as angry and violent as he was. He learned how to take his first punch from her. But there are few things that make him want to burn the world to ash. He's beaten the shit out of kids double his size anytime they said he'd never be a hero, and done the same to anyone who messed with his friend as a kid, not the spineless lackeys who trail along, but that fucking asshole who wouldn't stop trying to be better. When he receives the letter from Yua, he's not worried. He knows for a fact that he's passed. It isn't arrogance when he sees his name in first place, but the way of the world. The useless side characters hadn't done much to be of any use. He's very much ready to see Dooku's name in last place. Except it isn't. 5th place, he thinks a second before his pleasant displeasure, something only he could feel turn to absolute hate. He wanted to fight, and to lash out at everything and everyone. The rage follows him to school. They congratulate him, as is natural, and he takes his place as king. But they fucking have the audacity to so much as offer Deku a kind word, and he very nearly breaks his desk in rage. But the explosion makes them shut up and Deku is too scared to look him in the face. This will be the last day of middle school before they all travel their separate way. The side characters will go on to mediocre schools and live mediocre lives. But he's destined for glory. Until the principal calls their proud graduates to UA to his office at the end of the day. He wants to slam Deku in the wall just to see him cry. But not in the middle of the hallway where anyone could report it with impunity and fuck up his chances at the last moment. He stands to Deku's left, a smoldering pile of rage made manifest, as the principal drones on about how proud and delighted he is that 2 of their students will go to Yua. I'm especially proud of you, Midoriya. Your success was a delightful, don't destroy his desk, surprise. I believe your determination will ennoble future students who believe their goal is out of reach. Bakugo takes a deep breath as Deku stammer. Thank you, sir. And you, Bakugo. No one doubted your success. But first place truly is an achievement. Bakugo rolls his eyes. Now, should either of you require advice or even help, do not hesitate to contact me. Fucking worm, Bakugo thinks as they're allowed to go. He keeps close to Deku, taking pleasure in the way he shakes. Good. He should remember who was the king, and who was a fucking hallway servant. The moment they're out of sight, he spins Deku around and slams him into the wall. Bakugo can see the tears in his eyes already. Pathetic. I fucking warned you to stay out of my way, he roars and watches Deku flinch. I should beat the shit out of you for ruining my dream. The bastard has the audacity to chuckle. I thought your dream was to be a hero. You're still going to UA. It takes all he has not to smash Deku's head in the wall. I was supposed to be the only one from this school. Who cares? No one's gonna remember where you came from. Deku shakes his head. I'm going to be a hero. The violent rage eases up slightly. Bakugo's palms are sweaty, knees weak from restraining himself, and arms heavy from holding Deku up. He wants to blow the little shit up. But he sees the streak of white hair. He lets go of Deku, surprised when he stays standing. Deku shorter than him always has, and always will be. Deku grins at him despite the tears. It looks like a grimace, too many teeth to be anything happy. When did his teeth get so sharp? Bakugo wonders, stepping back, because the longer he stares the more teeth he sees, and they seem never-ending and ready to consume everything. I'm going to be a hero, Izuku says unwavering, changing completely yet not changing at all. His eyes are shining, Kaken thinks errantly. He meets those eyes and regrets it immediately. There's something terrifying lurking in those eyes, something vaster than worlds, and yet so finitely small. An echo of nightmares watches him through those eyes, and he knows his mind would break under the sheer strange weight of seeing it in full. I know everything about you, this thing that wears Izuku's skin says. And I know you can never be a hero. Do you remember what you did? I do. He takes another step back, looks to the white hair again. Remembers being terrified of what he might have done that day months ago and running, dreading what might be, until Izuku returned to class terrified, almost broken and scared, but most of all alive. Maybe that was why he had left Izuku alone, and not because the boy had saved him from the sludge villain. Izuku walks past Kachen, who stands there numb. He glances back, not surprised that Izuku's back is tall, or that the setting sun frames him. His shadow is long, and somehow darker than night. For a moment where the world seems to waver, Izuku's shadow reminds him of a monster with too many eyes and teeth that shreds through all that is warm in the world, arms of twisted crystal and infernal engines powering it. The moment disappears and Kaken falls to the ground, landing on his knees. He breathes deeply, trying to forget whatever he just saw. Because no matter how terrifying Izuku is, he only became so after that day. Stop fucking thinking about it, and knowing that is more than Kaken can deal with. He picks himself up long after Izuku is gone, dusts his clothes off, walks home and chooses to forget. Katsuki Bakugo is angry. TDB. Izuku is surprised that Katsuki doesn't antagonize him after school. He remembers the anger his oldest friend had during the meeting, and is completely shocked that he walks home without so much as an angry word. Maybe he's not mad at me, Izuku wonders. The voice in his head giggles. Two can keep a secret if one is killed, it says, then laughs again. Do you want the secret, little killer? Izuku frowns. I don't have any secrets. The voice quiets. And then the laughter returns full force, loud and grating enough that he's shocked his ears aren't bleeding. A lie is a lie is a lie, the voice whispers. An easy secret. Did you tell my mother about All Might? Izuku frowns. She's my mother. Then tries recalling their conversations. And he can't remember a single mention of All Might. Fine, I forgot. Another secret. The dark is generous and full of truth. Its love will set the stars alight. You are not the dark. You are the dark below. Izuku winces, pain lancing through his skull, and grits his teeth. Shut up, he snarls. Just shut up. A hard secret. The first time you died you were killed. Shut up, Izuku roars, falling to his knees and clutching his head. Shut up and don't say another word. The voice somehow smiles sadly. I will keep the secrets that will break you. I will remember what you will not. It falls silent. Izuku feels its presence disappear. There is blood in his mouth. He's bitten through his tongue, and Izuku spits it out and watches carefully. When he is certain it won't grow legs and lead an army of spiders to kill him, Izuku walks away. He spends the next few days lazing about in the real world. He trains and meets All Might once more. His mentor explains why he was silent, to which Izuku thanks him for not interfering. Knowing that he earned his place, and was not assisted through backroom deals, is worth all the pain of the last few months. Shinsu messages him frequently. They both think the exam is unfair, as despite his powerful quirk, Izuku doesn't understand why Shinsu stares at him like he's an angel and exceptionally high grades. Shinsu just doesn't have the abilities to destroy a robot. But he can become stronger, and Izuku sincerely believes that there's no reason you should just stay in the background. Izuku says one day, whilst they're walking to the train station after a day of shopping. He's glad he wrote a list of everything they needed, because Shinsu is hopeless at shopping and hates malls. It had taken the better part of the train ride there to convince not Shinsu to bolt immediately. And lunch had been fun as Shinsu ate like a child, leaving a mess everywhere and getting covered in icing sugar from his crepe. Well, not everyone has a combat quirk. Mr. I kick robots to death. The words are said in jest, and it causes Izuku to flush. I broke both my legs. Shinsu rolls his perpetually tired eyes and finds a spot of icing sugar still clinging to his jacket. He rubs at it furiously, which Izuku knows will only make it worse. Do you seriously not know how to use your quirk? And what is your quirk, anyway? I thought it was an emitter type with all the shadows. But the kick doesn't make sense. Izuku laughs nervously. I'm still figuring everything out. He points at his white hair, oddly used to it by now. Hidden quirk. Shinsu stares at him for a long moment. Fine. You'll tell me when you're ready. They walk in silence, taking in the city. Musutafu is a perfectly fine city, but one that Izuku feels he's explored to death, searching out hero fights, stalking agencies for chances to talk to the pros, and just spending time with his mother. There isn't anything that could shock him at this point. They pass by a dojo. Izuku looks through the glass, seeing students in white keikogi taking up their stances before a teacher. He thinks he might recognize a student or two from the entrance exam, but he can't be certain. But he does recognize the man in the back, and that stops him dead in his tracks. Midoriya, Shinsu says. Izuku looks up. You all right? He nods slowly. Why yeah, we just need to go in here right now. Shinsu frowns, then shrugs. Fine. He's in the dojo quickly. There's a counter which Izuku walks towards, hearing Shinsu huff as he trots to keep up. Izuku smiles at the blonde teenager manning the counter. He wears the same white keikogi as the rest of the students, but he does have a black belt with one gold mark on one side and a blue notch next to it. None of that is anywhere near as interesting as the massive tail behind him. Hello, the blonde boy says. Are you looking to sign up? He glances first at Izuku, then at Shinsu as he comes to stands beside Izuku. I just wanted to talk to that guy over there. He points at Jin Mo Rai, who still hasn't noticed him. The boy frowns. He's busy at the moment. Please. I just haven't seen him in a while. You know him? I don't think he'd be acting like this if he didn't, Shinsu says. Even an idiot could have guessed that. There's no reason to be rude, the blonde boy says. Just go. Izuku cuts Shinsu off by tugging at his wrist. He's not certain why he was about to use his quirk, but he does appreciate it. Thanks, he whispers and looks back to the blonde boy, who's watching them warily. Look, he helped me out a lot, and I wanted to thank him. I wouldn't have gotten into UA without him. The boy's eyes widen. You're the kid who destroyed the zero-pointer. Izuku ducks his head. That was an axe kick you used, the boy says. It was renewal taekwondo, wasn't it? Did Master Mo Rai train you? Yeah, Izuku mumbles. Then why didn't you say so? Izuku looks up to see the boy. Not smiling, but his face is less harsh. My name's Masahiro Jiro. It's a pleasure to meet you. Izuku sees his extended hand, unsure of what to do. Shinsu sighs and bumps Izuku with his shoulder. You're supposed to shake it. Izuku blinks. Oh, sorry. He reaches out and shakes Ojiro's hand. You children are loud, a new voice says. Izuku startles and trips seeing Jin squatting on the counter. What do you need? And who is this one? I do not want another student. Hitoshi Shinsu, his friend says first. And I didn't want to come here. Jin cocks his head. 6 months to find this place, Izuku. Slow. He stares incredulously at his teacher. How was I supposed to find this place? You told me you were busy when I messaged you. I was. You did not message again. Jin leans forward, falls a bit, and lands on the floor. You would find me when you had need. You have need, and you have found me. It is good to see you passed. Ojiro, take Izuku to free mat in the back. Spar. Use quirks. Have fun. Don't embarrass me. Ojiro sighs and looks to Izuku. Come on, he says. Izuku looks to Jin. Sees him focused on Shinsu. Looks to Shinsu. Gets a nod in return. He lets Ojiro lead him to the back absently, looking back and failing to hear the conversation Shinsu has with his former teacher. They reach the mat and Izuku takes off his tracksuit jacket. He can be overwhelming, Ojiro says, apologetic. Please don't destroy the building with your quirk. Izuku laughs, nervously, as he stretches his legs. I won't. I'm still figuring everything out. Ojiro nods and falls into a ready stance. Izuku frowns. It looks like a karate stance. You aren't using renewal? Ojiro shakes his head solemnly. That is reserved for strengthening quirks. Jin was not my primary teacher. He taught me to use my tail in combat, but nothing more. Izuku nods and slides into a stance. When Ojiro moves, it is much faster than Jin ever did when they sparred. His eyes strain to keep up with the punch, the blonde throws, and his block is nearly too slow. Ojiro kicks him in the side before he can recover. His breath leaves him in a big whoosh. Izuku rolls with the blow, scrambling to get back in a stance. Ojiro is on him just as he's come to his feet, moving quickly and recklessly. Izuku kicks out thinking Ojiro has left an opening in his aggression. A strong tail breaks the blow, and Izuku barely has a moment to realize his mistake before he's punched in the face straight through his guard. He leans with the blow, arches his back, and contorts into a flip. His other foot hits Ojiro in the chin. It is different fighting someone using their quirk. Ojiro is fast on his own, but that tail makes him harder to predict. It lets Ojiro commit more offensively, as it guards against Izuku's attacks easily. And when Izuku does get past Ojiro's guard, he has to worry about the tail tripping him up. To make it worse, Ojiro uses it to abruptly shift directions. He's scrambling back from another punch to the chest when he decides to use his quirk. He always produces shadow matter unconsciously now. With the bright lights of the dojo, it will be weak. And he's already lost a lot just from his concentration slipping. But it should be enough. When Ojiro comes at him again, Izuku flings his arms out to deflect Ojiro's punch. He steps back to dodge the tail strike and explodes forward, fist raised. Ojiro is fast. He's already leaping back, which is exactly what Izuku wants. Dark tendrils lash out from the ground and wrap around the boy's ankle, dragging him back. Ojiro's eyes widen at Izuku's incoming fist. And then he twists rapidly, faster than Izuku can get a read on. His punch impacts something, but in a moment, he feels a blow to his side. It disorientates him instants before a heavy weight brings him to the ground. He lands hard, and isn't certain how his arm is twisted painfully behind him, and a knee digs into his lower back. Why yield, he yammers, tapping the mat. Ojiro's weight disappears in an instant. Izuku stays down, breathing deeply until a hand enters his vision. He takes it gratefully, and is in no way jealous at how easily Ojiro lifts him with one arm. The boy claps him on the shoulder. Good fight, he says, nodding to Izuku. 2 quirks? Izuku shakes his head, glad that his face is already flushed. No, same quirk. Different application. And that's the lie he's going with. You're fast, and that tail is a nightmare to fight. Ojiro smiles. And you have a few tricks. You should learn to fight with your quirk as well, not just with your fists. You're not really skilled in taekwondo. He is skilled enough, Jin says beside them suddenly. For only 6 months training. I do not remember you being considerably better. Ojiro bows at the waist. Forgive me, Master Jin. I hope you both learned something. He claps them both on the shoulder. Go get your friend, and come again. Now, head home. Shower. You stink. Izuku rolls his eyes and picks up his jacket on the floor, waving to Ojiro. He ties it around his waist instead of wearing it. Shinsu frowns uncertainly at him. He's odd, Shinsu says as they walk out the dojo. A tail isn't that odd. Shinsu sighs. Your teacher, Jin. He said he would train me. Izuku smiles. He's good at that. I thought you were his student. You know, I'm not sure exactly how it works. I think he's shown me everything I need to know right now. He tugs Shinsu's wrist and points. I hear they have some great pork cutlets. But I don't. He's cut off by Izuku's sharp glare. Have any problem whatsoever with that. Izuku laughs easily, surprised by just how much joy he takes in another person's presence. It reminds him of when his father was still around and Kachin was his friend. His smile dies down. He takes a breath and puts it out of mind. TDB. The night before school starts, Izuku double-checks that everything is in his bag. Notebooks and stationery. Check. Gym clothes. Check. He knows everything is in there after the first 3 times, but it never hurt anyone to check things 4 times over. He sees his deck of cards on the nightstand and scrambles to shove them in before he can forget them. He'll definitely need those if the monsters lurking in his mind act up again. He eats dinner with his mother. She has an easy smile on her face. "I'm proud of you," she says for the nth time this week. So much so that it has become something of a ritual. "I know. Do you remember that conversation we had about secrets?" She huffs. "I take that back. Do I need medical supplies? It isn't that kind of secret. Do you remember how I was training before I found my quirk?" She nods. "That's because I found a teacher." "I know you found a teacher," she says, startling Izuku. "You're smart, but you've never picked up any weights before. You would have had a lot more training injuries if you were doing it by yourself. You never said anything." She shrugs. "And say what?" "That I'm upset you're getting fitter. There are some things a mother shouldn't interfere in, especially when it isn't hurting you. I raised you to be a good kid." He flushes. "I never told you who was training me. And that was a lie. Honestly, I wasn't ready to tell you until last week. I forgive you. It's not like you're going to tell me it's All Might training you," she says with a laugh. Izuku looks up, scarlet all the way through his face and mortified. It's funny you mention that." His mother looks up, almost as if praying for strength. "Explain." And so, he does. He doesn't tell her everything, for some secrets are not his to say. Not once does he mention the name Toshinori Yagi, nor does he speak of his weakened form. He explains the nature of One for All, and it absolutely terrifies his mother of what might happen when his quirk and his hero's strengthening quirk mix. And even whilst he brushes it off, he has the same worries, and how strong he needed to be to wield it without his body breaking from its power. "I can understand why you kept this from me," she says after he falls silent. "But I am disappointed you waited until now to tell me." He laughs nervously. "It kinda slipped my mind." He winces at how weak the excuse sounds. All Might has many enemies, Izuku. No one's going to associate shadows with One for All. But villains will recognize that strength. It doesn't matter if they don't know about One for All. Any hero who becomes that strong will have enemies. She shakes her head. "I'm worried you didn't know everything when you made that deal." "I did." "Did you really?" The voice asks. "You're still young, Izuku. You don't know how the real world works." He rolls his eyes. "I've seen monsters, Kasan, and they don't scare me." "They should. You've never seen humans acting monstrously." That stops his reply. "You've read about statistics, but you've never seen people disregard basic human decency. You weren't there for the anti-quirk riots 20 years ago. You've never seen neighbors turn on each other so quickly. You've never seen the police arrest the wrong people and brutalize them. You've never seen a riot turn violent." He feels small in his seat, but not small enough. He's never seen his mother this bitter in his entire life, and the scathing heat is completely new to him. "I remember watching Taiwan sink and everyone there drown. One person's rage did that. The world isn't as cut and dry as you think it is." She smiles gently now. "You're young, and it's good that despite what you've seen, you can still believe life can be separated into humans and monsters, heroes and villains. But the world isn't like that. You're my son, and I hope you're ready when you learn." He goes to his bedroom, troubled. Was it really naive to see the world like that? Good people chose to be heroes, and whilst he knew they made mistakes and weren't perfect, didn't the fact that they tried make them good? And villains were evil. That's all there was to it. Sure, theft wasn't as bad as armed robbery, which wasn't as bad as murder, but those were all simply different shades of evil. "But you're a monster," the voice whispers. "Aren't all monsters villains? Shut up, and don't you dare say another word. Dread it. Run from it. Destiny arrives all the same." His body trembles. He can make out monsters lurking in the dark, always on the edge of escaping the dark below. They watch him ceaselessly. He can forget more often than not. Right now, he finds it difficult to do so. "Just keep quiet, please." Izuku reaches for the knife he keeps hidden away in his drawer. "You cursed me with knowledge, but I remember the secrets. Why is life, Shadow Shield? Don't. Please don't. There is no meaning but in death. And you are." He stabs the knife through his hand. The blade parts flesh easily, and the pain makes him want to scream. He groans, gritting his teeth. He breathes faster and faster as he looks at the knife and the blood. But the voice is gone. He knows how to clean and bandage injuries. But there are methods to heal it that won't take nearly as long as waiting for it naturally. He looks to his shoulder, where a long cut from one of the thread creatures should have left him incapacitated for a few weeks. Instead, it had healed quickly. Izuku delves into the abyss with ease. He lets his blood drip on the ground, uncaring of the monsters a scent as heady as fresh life carries. And whatever is foolish enough to attack him dies to shadows. The Continental Eye is almost a physical constant and stays in the same place. Izuku dives into it and lets the ocular fluid heal his wound rapidly. It scars, but not everything heals perfectly. He barely sleeps that night. When Shinsu sees him at the train, the boy is kind enough not to point out that his eyes are bloodshot. Nor does he bother Izuku when he falls asleep. He is kind enough to wake Izuku up just before their stop. They talk a bit as they walk the rest of the way to UA, but Izuku just doesn't have it in him. "Will you be alright?" Shinsu asks before they split off. The simple fact that Shinsu doesn't ask what's wrong, or even assume he has a right to know, makes Izuku smile. "Spent too long thinking last night." Shinsu nods tiredly, as always. He walks towards the general education building in the opposite direction of the heroics building. Izuku clenches his fist at the division, wondering how many people who could be amazing heroes in their own right are being ignored simply because their quirk didn't let them destroy robots. It's not right. There's something hot and burning in his chest, and it feels like he's choking beneath the weight of the emotion. It isn't shame, for he knows that flavor of heat. Nor is it even anger. He felt that much too often every birthday his father never came back, and he can never forget it. This is something more intense and all-consuming. "Midoriya," a solemn voice calls out. Izuku turns and sees Ajiro. The boy freezes, looking at Izuku warily. It takes him a moment to realize he's projecting his feelings at Ajiro. And that isn't fair. He takes a breath and lets the feeling pass away. "Sorry," he says and tries to smile. It comes out as a grimace, and he decides to give up on it. "Just a bit cranky. Didn't get enough sleep. Nerves. I understand." "No, you don't," Izuku thinks, but doesn't say as Ajiro leads him to their class. Surprisingly, the boy has an excellent sense of direction, something Izuku never really bothered with. The doors to their class are as massive as everything else in UAS. It makes him wonder again if it is simply to make a statement, or if it's because they've had students and teachers that large before. The class is mostly full already. He recognizes Kachan's voice immediately, even if Ojiro's broad shoulders stop him from seeing much. The other voice is familiar, and when he catches a flash of blue hair, he realizes it's the boy who called him out in front of the crowd during the exam. "Too loud," Ojiro says as he enters, somehow finding his seat immediately. The eclectic mix of people bewilders him. Though he pauses on the purple-skinned girl and the bird crow, he thinks person. Not because their mutations were particularly odd, but he's read enough about quirk relations not to assume they would want to be called either person or mutant. "You," a blue-haired boy says loudly, pointing at Izuku even as he stalks over. Izuku steps back automatically as the boy approaches. "Hi," he says meekly, trying his best to ignore all the eyes now watching him. "Ida, right?" "Yes, I'm from Ace." He is stopped from continuing his explanation by another voice. "Hey, it's the plain-looking boy." Izuku spins and sees the girl who argued so strongly for him. He flushes as she says, "All Might said you'd pass." "WW what?" "Who are?" "Go somewhere else if you want to make friends," a quiet voice says, but somehow it seems louder than everyone else. This is the heroics course, not a play center. Behind the girl, he can see a yellow caterpillar with the face of a homeless man. Izuku blinks as the rest of the class falls silent. That, at least, was confirmation that everyone else could see this as well. This is by no stretch the oddest thing Izuku's seen, and since it doesn't seem malevolent, he isn't particularly afraid. The caterpillar grows an arm and Izuku watches incredulous as it brings a drink to its mouth. "This is the heroics course," it says before standing upright. Izuku blinks again as it unzips its skin and a man-shaped creature in all black, but for the pile of bandages on its shoulders, steps out. "It took you 7 seconds before you were silent," it says, dropping its yellow shell. "Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shouta Aizawa." "Huh." The voice in his head says, almost sounding as confused as Izuku. "I know this is sudden, but put this on and meet me at the field." He removes a UA gym uniform from somewhere and drops it on the ground. "If you're late, I'm expelling you." "What?" The teacher stares at the student, a red-haired boy with hair that looks like he spends 3 hours every morning on it. This is Yua, Aizawa says, as if that answers everything. You have 15 minutes. He walks out, leaving the class in silence. They look at each other, confused. And then, I don't want to be expelled. Pack mentality takes over, and they sprint out the door. The blue-haired boy leads the pack to the locker room. It is a bit of a mad scramble to change and be out on the field in the short time they have. Izuku nearly gets there last, if not for Ojiro prodding him and helping him to find his other shoe, which he lost beneath a bench. Their homeroom teacher waits on the field for them. He says nothing until the last straggler joins the group. 13 minutes, he says, and picks a ball up from the floor. Acceptable. We'll cut it down to 5 minutes by the end of the term, if you manage not to get expelled. He throws the ball to Kachin, who catches it easily. Though his rage spikes, he is smart enough not to say anything. Yua gives its teachers freedom in how they operate, he explains. If I find you wanting, I will expel you. I expelled the entirety of 1 or 2 years ago, because they lacked any potential to be heroes. I will not hesitate to expel any of you. The group falls deathly still. Good. You understand the stakes. Before you took national fitness tests without your quirks. Restricting you with such inane rules is illogical if you wish to be a hero. You. Throw that ball as far as you can. So long as you stay in the circle, then I do not care what you do. Kakin scoffs and walks up to the circle. The waft of smoke reaches Izuku, and he knows Kakin is excited. He winds his arm up, and a moment before it leaves his hand, he activates his quirk. The explosion is smaller and more tightly controlled than the ones he usually uses. 800 meters flat, Aizawa says once the ball has landed. Know your limits first, and then grow strong. That is the only way to advance as a hero. Yua will beat every weakness out of you. If you don't have the potential, then you'll get booted out. This is no place to make friends if that was your hope. Oh, and whoever comes last gets expelled. TDB. Izuku wonders exactly how close he is to expulsion. He probably isn't last, because his 50m dash sprint was sub 7 seconds. And he thanks his luck that Jin Mo Rai emphasized speed over strength when they were together. It was why he did hill sprints more than endurance running. But very test outside of that had been an absolute disaster. His long jump had been pathetic, and his standing jump was only acceptable of there being students less fit than him with quirks that didn't help them much. And he was not certain if performance mattered as much as ranking per test, because the latter meant he might very well be in last place overall. They're inside now doing the grip strength test. He stands near Ojiro, but much of his focus is on the boy with a bird's head. His quirk, from what Izuku could tell, involved a creature connected to his body colored black and purple. It almost looks like a multitude of threads, giving it its elasticity. He watches it squeeze down on the grip meter. It can't be, he thinks, but knows it is. Why don't you use your tail? He asks Ojiro before the bird boy can catch him staring. Too large, he says, and shows Izuku how he can only barely fit the tip in the space. Why don't you use your strengthening quirk? Because I don't want to break my hand. You have another quirk, Ojiro reminds him. Izuku opens his mouth to reply, closes it, realizes he isn't anywhere near as smart as he thinks he is. He calls the tendrils of shadow matter that he makes in the back of his mind during the day and lets them twine between his fingers and around the meter grip. Then he squeezes and bids them do the same. The meter chimes and reads a cool 84 kilograms. He looks to Ojiro. I have no idea if that's good, he says, because the dark tendrils are already fading, and it'll take him well after the tests are over to generate more. I had 90, so I believe so. Ojiro tilts his head. How do your shadows work? I seek and draw them, I guess, from my actual shadow. He points to it. Just has to have enough contrast with the environment, or it stops working. That seems like an arbitrary power limit. Izuku shrugs. Who knows? Maybe there's someone writing my story, and they suck at being internally consistent with their rules. Ojiro chuckles. A bad author indeed. The last test they have is the ball throw. He watches as others get ridiculous distances, and the girl who argued for him even gets an infinity which he knows isn't true. He's seen infinity, or at least interacted with creatures that found the concept wanting. That ball will disintegrate long before that. He takes a deep breath, knowing he needs at least one amazing result to secure a spot. He tosses the ball to get a feel of its weight, ignoring whatever it is that Kachin is saying with the rest of the students. Right now, all that matters is passing. The power All Might gifted him feels different from his innate quirk. That feels like walking into a dark room with no assurance that the monsters weren't after you. One for All is like a live wire carrying all of Japan's electricity. It is terrifying to grasp because there is just so much power that his body can't handle. And yet he has no other real option if he wants to continue his education. He isn't ready to explain to either his mother or All Might his failure. He grasps the live wire with his mind and feels power absolute and uncontrollable fill his arm. He winds his hand back and throws with every ounce of power he has. Izuku watches it sail forward and land. 46 meters, the machine shouts. His shock lasts half a moment. Then it hits him at once. The shadows are gone. He can't feel them anymore. He thinks he understands what it's like to be blinded, but somehow this feels so much worse. Something so fundamental to his very being has just been torn away, and the lack of it is like a hot iron down his spine. And that has nothing to the pain at the base of his spine. All of this he feels in a single moment. I erased your quirk. He turns unsteadily to face his teacher. The man's hair is up, and the bandages floating wildly, revealing a pair of goggles. The man says something, but the pain in Izuku's head makes it almost impossible to focus on his words. Stop, Izuku says weakly. Aizawa scoffs. You can't even take the slightest hint of criticism. The exam should have weeded you out immediately. Izuku coughs as Aizawa continues. He sees blood on his hand and looks at it until a new spike of pain hits his head. Your quirk, he groans before he collapses to his knees. His senses come rushing back and much of the pain disappears. The voice in his head returns with a roar, and Izuku only now realizes that it had completely disappeared. He hears footsteps, but more importantly, he feels the shadow of the person approaching. A hand on his shoulder shakes him. I'm fine, he mumbles, not hearing what they're saying. Give me a moment. Sound returns slower. He looks up and sees Aizawa above him, looking almost concerned. What just happened? The man asks, then glares at Ojiro, who tries to approach. Izuku wipes the blood from his nose. I don't know, he says. No one's ever done that to me. Something like guilt flashes across Aizawa's face. Let's get you to the nurse. Aizawa looks around. Takoyami, take him to the nurse. I can take him, Ojiro says. There is nothing like sympathy in Aizawa's face. Silence. You haven't completed the test. This stops his maybe friend from approaching. Izuku coughs, still in pain. I haven't finished my test. And I'll expel you if you try anything so stupid. Pain brings clarity, Eraserhead. The man startles. The goggles gave it away. If I can't do something as simple as throwing a ball, then I don't deserve to be a hero. Izuku stands and wonders how crazy he looks glaring at his teacher. But he's become used to it at this point. And what will you do? Break your arm the same way you did to your leg in the exam. You aren't going to be able to save anyone like that. You barely know how to control your quirk. He forces a grin. Maybe not, but I still think I have a right to try. Aizawa scoffs. If you break your arm, don't come back tomorrow. If you come last in this test, then clean out your locker. Izuku nods. He looks to Kaken, who seems to be more interested than anything else, and picks the ball up again. Losing an entire sense had been horrible. But he still had 5 other senses to use, and that experience gave him an idea. One that might have been reckless. But he was already facing expulsion. The live wire is there and waiting. He lets the power flow through his arm and concentrates in his finger. When he throws the ball, he takes extra care to let his finger be the last thing to touch the ball. And then he releases his power in one explosive burst. His finger breaks instantly. But that pain means nothing as he watches the ball soar through the air. Deku! He hears Kachen roar, explosions already going off. He turns back and sees his friend stalking forward, his rage apocalyptic. It terrifies him. And then ropes wrap around Kaken. The bandages pull him closer to Aizawa, whose anger is frigid. Violence against a classmate will result in expulsion. He looks to the bird boy. I told you to take him to the nurse. Oh, that's Takoyami. Takoyami watches him apathetically. Izuku waves to Ojiro and Uraraka as they walk past them. The moment they are out of sight, Izuku stumbles. Takoyami catches him. Thanks, he whispers and extracts himself from the boy's grip. It would be remiss of me to let you obtain more injuries. Your condition has worsened. Izuku shakes his head. No, I was just acting like I wasn't in pain. Takoyami looks at him as if he's grown another head. Behavior like that is dangerous. To yourself and others. I didn't have much of a choice, he says and follows behind Takoyami. I used up my shadows during the grip test. It is a risk to tell someone he's never had a conversation with all of this. But the boy's quirk is driving him almost insane. Because the boy's quirk reminds him of the creatures from the floating forest. And he needs to know how that's possible. Shadows? Takoyami asks, curiosity lacing his voice. Yeah. They don't like the light so much, so I did what I could. I see. And you've always used shadows. Izuku smiles. Good. The boy was just as interested in him. Well, not all of us have easy-to-control quirks like yours. Takoyami tenses, and whatever rapport Izuku had built dies up instantly. You should not make light of what you know nothing of. The words are harsh, scathing. Do not think yourself the first to try and obtain information on my quirk. I'm not. The boy whips around so he can glare at Izuku. The force of it freezes him in place. Do not take me for a fool. Now, come. I've wasted enough of my time. I keep the secrets, the voice snarls. I tell the lies. Izuku sighs, and they walk in the tense silence. Takoyami doesn't so much as glance back when they reach the nurse's office. I assume you capable of opening the door, the boy says before leaving. His steps are even and measured, but they somehow are louder than an earthquake. TDB. Shouta Aizawa worries about many things. Everyone sees his behavior and assumes him indifferent. The media sees him rarely, so they make little mention of his hero alias. To the world, he is simply an unkempt man with little interest in being a teacher who might be a pro-hero. All these things are true, none of which is completely true. He spends time in his sleeping bag because he understands the importance of sleeping whenever possible. The nights are never long enough to mark work, plan out lessons, and act as a hero. He may not patrol and search for petty villains like Kamui Woods or Mount Lady Dew, as he has long since grown out of such simple habits. Instead, he investigates and gathers intelligence on the many gangs and crime rings who are the actual threats, not a sludge villain who takes up the media spotlight. His students don't know, and he will forever be happy if they never know the threats he shields them from. Principal Nezu knows, though very little is unknown to his superior and Hisashi knows, because he refuses to allow Shouta to ever be alone. But that is secondary to his role as a teacher. The greatest offense against villains is to train the children under his care to be successful heroes. And part of that duty is protecting them from themselves. It was why he expelled the entirety of the class 2 years ago. It wasn't that their quirks weren't strong. The boy with the unraveling quirk could have become an amazing underground hero, and the girl who controlled the wind itself could very well have become a top-tier hero in a few years. But they lacked the necessary mentality to achieve greatness. They lacked the burning drive to become great. And the few who did toed the class line because of peer pressure. It was why he argues, every year without fail, that the exam needed to be changed. He is thankful that the panel of judges consider more than just how easily you can break a robot, but still disappointed that it is the primary factor. There is no test, or even an interview, to observe the thought process of a student. Students like Katsuki Bakugo, whose quirk was unbelievably powerful, but his temperament would be a continual challenge for Shouta to deal with as the year progressed. He can't decide if the boy has a greater or lower likelihood of his fellow middle school graduate, Izuku Midoriya. That boy worries Shouta. His quirk, Shadow Shield as the records show, is versatile. He remembers watching the boy call shadows to aid him in the grip test. But he also remembers the state the boy was in after the entrance exam. Showing signs of both emitter and strengthening characteristics, the boy should have been a clear candidate for top student. But he is painfully shy and terrified, and the strengthening portion of the quirk left him incapacitated. Any hero like that would be a liability to their team. It was why he erased the boy's quirk. In hindsight, Shouta realizes he should have understood why the boy asked him to stop. Instead, he continued to berate him, not realizing Midoriya was injured. That guilt, alongside the fact that Midoriya recognized him for who he was the only reason he let him attempt the test. He doesn't acknowledge the almost primal fear the boy's bloody smile inspired. And the results had been stunning. But now he must deal with the consequences of that. And maybe piece together why Takoyami had returned to class furious. He sighs when he reaches Recovery Girl's office, after he has rid himself of the children. These students were already proving to be a nightmare on the first day. Chio sits behind a desk that lets her look over most of the beds in the office. He would know. She had caught him trying to escape more than once as a student. She looks up and does not smile. That is when he realizes he may have made more than a little mistake. Less than 2 hours, and you injure a student. You could very well have killed the boy. Shouta refuses to wince. I may respect you, Shouta, but your actions can be taken as harmful negligence at best. He blinks, the only sign of worry that he permits. Negligence, especially the harmful variety, wasn't anything a hero ever wanted to have on their record, and Nezu might very well fire him for it. There was no reason to assume erasing his quirk would cause that reaction. And they both know that. It has never happened before. Chiyo sighs and slides the file she was reading to him. It's Midoriya's quirk summary, and he skims over it. Students aren't required to officially register their quirk or submit to testing, she says as he reads. Shadow Shield. A bit pretentious, but not the worst. Claims to be a hidden quirk that appeared in the last year. Emitter properties from the shadows and strengthening properties that show no correlation. In essence, he's got a grab bag quirk. And I'm almost certain he has some form of temporary mutation tied to his quirk. He sets the file down. Why? Without going through a full assessment, this is only conjecture, but he describes feeling blinded when his quirk was erased before the pain started. Aizawa frowns, confused. He can feel shadows in a certain radius in addition to his regular senses, which will also have to be amended in his file. From what I can tell, that sense might be directly tied to his nerves, which explains the nosebleed. But not the internal bleeding. Shouta frowns. Or the broken finger. Without a full quirk assessment, we can't be certain of why he reacted the way he did. Then we'll request one. We have valid reasons to do so. And more importantly, with one he would know exactly how far he could push his student. We just need his parents' consent. She looks at her screen. Yes, his parents. Shouta frown deepens, immediately worried. What's the issue with them? Father isn't in the picture. Nothing special, but it is his life with his mother that I'm worried about. She didn't send him to a quirk counselor when his quirk manifested. He sees where she's going with this. And hidden quirks invariably manifest under traumatic circumstances. So, you think that she's abusive? It wouldn't be the first time that something like this had happened. It wouldn't be the last. I only have conjecture, but look at this. She turns the screen. I took these when I was checking for other injuries. I'll have to keep them off school servers since I didn't technically get his consent. What stands out to you? It's a picture of Midoriya shirtless. He has a few bruises on his torso like those from internal bleeding. It pisses him off that he hurt his student so easily without a single thought. His face has been cleaned up and is no longer bloody. Shouta sees a wide scar on the boy's right shoulder. And then he sees the long scar on the boy's left forearm. Fuck, he says. My thoughts exactly. He was terrified and skittish around me. He flinched when I reached to check his pupillary response. And he very nearly bolted when I asked him to take off his shirt. Shouta closes his eyes. Takes a deep breath. Opens his eyes. If she is abusive, then she'll have no reason to sign the consent form. And if it's bad enough that he resorted to suicide, then we need to get him out of that household. Legally, there isn't much we can do without him coming forward. That rarely happens, as you well know. If he doesn't feel there is safety with us, we can do very little, except encourage him in the time we have with him. Chiyo opens a drawer and pulls out another form. Give it to him. Hopefully, the mother isn't a problem, and it had something to do with his old school. Shouta takes the form and nods to Chiyo. It isn't even lunchtime, and these students are already giving him more trouble than most. At the door, he pauses. Pain brings clarity. HM? He said that to me. He was quoting the tenets of combat. Oh, that little book you wrote. It was a bit pretentious for you to think you knew everything back then. That's not the point. The point is that he said that after I used my quirk on him, any other student should have been crying in pain. He just went on to break his finger. And you let him? He was determined to prove himself. Shouta sighs. That's the kind of excuse I hate. I'm abdicating all responsibility for my actions, aren't I? Chiyo huffs. So long as you know you can improve. Now go, I have other things to do. He doesn't ask what. Shouta knows that she has to deal with the health of every student on campus, and she has to approve very much of the training regiments and trips the school implements. She has to constantly monitor how the students' quirks changed, improved, or degraded over time in addition to her role as a general counselor. Shouta did not envy her workload, but he does respect it. He walks through the Yua halls, greeting a few of the older students he taught. Going to the teacher's lounge isn't an option since he'll have to either deal with All Might who irritates him on principle or Hizashi who will pry until he reveals everything. And while he will never admit how deeply he cherishes their friendship, the man is painfully unsubtle. He turns a corner and sees Midoriya 2 seconds before they collide. Whilst he could dodge out of the way very easily, it lets him see how the boy reacts. Almost instinctively, and despite the book his eyes are glued to, Midoriya pivots and sidesteps, looking startled all the while. His book, though, goes flying. Shouta catches it. Midoriya looks up and flinches back at Shouta's gaze. Aizawa-sensei, he greets warily. He looks at the cover of the book. Tenets of Combat, he reads out loud, feeling cold finger of dread run down his back, before extending it to Midoriya. The boy takes it cautiously, almost as if he's stealing from a viper. Sorry, the boy mutters, looking down. For what? Midoriya tenses. Nearly bumping into you. You didn't, so don't waste your time apologizing. Wasting energy over something trivial is illogical. Yes, sensei. Almost certain he's making things worse, but with no other common connection. Aizawa asks, what do you think of the book? Midoriya looks up, and the first hints of excitement show. The writer seems pretty experienced and knows what they're talking about. I'm not sure why it isn't a standard text. Shouta very nearly smiles. It's a close thing. UA doesn't utilize texts without authors for first years. Quirk philosophy is a third-year elective, and it sometimes covers that. Midoriya's eyes widen. Does it cover Oninoki and Ando and Salvador and every other big name? The boy grins. When it isn't bloody or determined, his smile seems to light up the whole world. I've read them all. Well, not all of them or everything they've written since there's no time, but I try to get through a few every other month except. Shouta lets the boy ramble. It's surprising. He never expected a student to have more than a passing interest, but Midoriya casually says things that belie a depth of knowledge on the subject. And my mother gave me, he says, then blinks. The excitement vanishes. Sorry, I was rambling. Aizawa wants to sigh and shake the boy until he spills every secret he has. Instead, he hands Izuku the form. What's this? Quirk assessment form. The boy freezes. We'll need your mother's consent. Midoriya swallows and looks away. Is this really necessary? Yes. If you're still learning to use your quirk, then an assessment is a useful indicator of your limits. The boy's smile dies. It doesn't vanish, but whatever warmth it had leaves, and the hallway feels colder for it. Yes, sensei, he whispers. Can I go now? Shouta lets him. Watching the hunched back of the boy, it makes him wonder just how bad his life at home is. Then he remembers that long and winding scar. The day hasn't even ended, and he already feels like he has failed his students. This is going to be a long year. TDB. Izuku walks to the train station with Ida, Yuroroka, and a red-haired boy he's learnt is called Kirishima. Ida, he finds, is strict and formal in a way that is equal parts endearing as it is hilarious. And Yuroroka is an eternal fount of optimism, but her sense of humor is distinct as she encourages Ida, and snickers when he isn't looking. Kirishima is odd. And not just for the hair, which Izuku can't decide if it's dyed or not. Then again, his hair is shades of green, so it is a bit hypocritical to judge the boy. I can't believe how manly you were, the boy says, grinning. He has sharp teeth, and Izuku wonders how often he bites through his lips and tongue. You just broke your finger like it was nothing. Izuku flushes. It wasn't manly. No, it was reckless and foolhardy, Ida says, though it comes off more like a shout. Intentionally harming yourself is never the right answer. Oh, come on, he had to pass, Kirishima argues. Otherwise he would have been expelled. What's a broken finger compared to being expelled on the first day? Yuroroka, you agree with me, right? She smiles brightly. I don't know. I think Ida has a point. Her smile turns just the slightest bit gleeful as Ida points at Kirishima. Your harmful mentality will not corrupt other students. He lets them argue and raises a brow at Yuroroka. Was that necessary? She cocks her head, confused. Was what necessary? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Nope. I have no clue. He shakes his head and lets the conversation go on without him. Their voices are pleasant in a weird sort of way, and their casual acceptance of him is something that he is still unused to. He looks up when they fall silent. The three of them stare at him. What? Yuroroka answers. We were just wondering why you got so hurt during the assessment. Izuku smiles. It isn't particularly honest. Oh, hey, is that Shinsu? Shinsu. He ignores them and trots over to his friend, who looks just as bewildered as the group trailing behind him. Shinsu, were you avoiding me? Whatever. Anyway, say hi to everyone. He lets them make introductions, glad he doesn't have to answer that question. Because even he isn't too sure why exactly having his quirk erased hurt his body so much. Either way, he steers the conversation towards their classes and the heroes teaching them. He learns, to his surprise, that Shinsu is a fan of Present Mike. And Uraraka punches Kirishima in the arm when he claims Midnight as his favorite teacher so far. Ida and Uraraka get off first, both needing to take another train in a different direction. And Kirishima leaves them, whilst they're downtown because he has some shopping he needs to do. You made friends, Shinsu says. Did you force them to take your number? Izuku flushes. I don't know if we're friends. And no. I'm surprised you introduced us. Why? You're a friend. They're nice. I like them. No reason not to introduce you. Then we can all be friends. Shinsu laughs, suddenly. Izuku, I think your definition of friend is a bit different from everyone else. He scratches the back of his head, confused. People who talk and like each other. I'm a bit new at it. Really, you and Ajiro were the first friends I had in a while. Midoriya, it's almost like you find someone, smile at them, and decide, oh, I like you and keep them. That's not how it works. I don't do that. Friends will betray you. And even if I do, it's working. That makes Shinsu snicker once more. Sure, whatever you say. Izuku stares at his friend, not sure of what exactly is so funny. But he accepts it with a shrug and has mostly forgotten about it by the time he gets home. His mother isn't home yet, so he gets started with making dinner. She takes over when she arrives and Izuku does his homework whilst he waits. They sit in front of the TV, watching some drama or other that his mother enjoys. It may be childish, but he rests his head on her lap. Her fingers run through his hair. This isn't the first time they have done this, and it usually follows a particularly bad encounter in the abyss. Her movements change, becoming more coordinated. Cass-san, are you braiding my hair? She hums. Maybe. Izuku sighs. There are infinitely worse things she could be doing. My teacher wants you to sign off on a quirk assessment. Her hands still for a moment before she resumes what she is doing. I thought you didn't want to have one. I didn't. And you do now. What changed? He closes his eyes. One of my teachers can erase quirks. When he used it on me? Well, let's say it wasn't the worst state I've been in. You know I've wanted you to go for one since the first day. But I'm not sure if you should just because you feel forced to. He considers her words. Okay.